Also, middle school girls soccer won the championship for their division, the PVML league. So that was really exciting. I believe that was about a week ago over at Hamden Academy. They won the championship.
Meredith, I thank you for mentioning that. And if I may, that was a fantastic night for our girls, 4-1 versus, rival Holbrook on the Hamden Academy artificial turf. What a night for our team. It was a lot of fun.
Very exciting. And finally, kind of leaving the topic of student groups and recognitions, I want to recognize our school admin assistants and Lynn Gray for their work to get our state reports submitted. And there's just a lot that goes into that this time of year. And it's obviously very important for our subsidy and funding. So just want to acknowledge their great work to get those reports submitted. That's all for me.
Great. Thank you. Next up, we have director reports. So we'll start with Lisa.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking, giving a shout out to Rose's Bikes for a donation that they made for our physical therapy students. We often sit at meetings and we talk about, just navigating the school and balance and, motor abilities. And these are the kids that really struggle to learn how to ride bikes. And I reached out to a couple local bike shops and asked, if there was something there that we might be able to purchase to assist our students with, gaining these skills and giving them another level of independence. And Rose's Bike Shop, they reached out to us. They donated a beautiful 24-inch bike. Our physical therapist was quite pleased with it. So I'm hoping to see that used for our students in the future. As far as special education goes, it's been a very busy fall. We've already had 9 new referrals. I don't think that was counting the 2 that were sitting on my desk this afternoon. We've begun or completed 35 evaluations already. And it's been a hopping, very busy fall. We've constantly are dealing with change as well. We have been understaffed as far as educational technicians. And in the last several weeks, I had 3 additional resignations at ASA, and we were able to hire 2 ed techs with great skills, great backgrounds for ASA. And we're also able to fill just today we filled our high school position. So that leaves us with 3 additional positions, and people are working very hard to cover the needs of all of our kiddos. Moving on from that, we have recently begun our Special Olympics program. I believe that we have a history of Special Olympics, but it was no longer happening when I arrived, and we've recently breathed life into it. Holly Gunn is taken over as the point person for Special Olympics, and we had 7 Orono students participate recently in the Piscataquis, Penobscot, Hancock County Special Olympics. There was a bowling event. It was televised. We had some of our students with a little sound bite in that. So that was pretty awesome to see. The kids were super excited. Pictures were taken, and staff was really supportive that attended. And it was kind of fun to go into the classrooms where these kids are, and they were very excited about how awesome participating was, and excited about the awards that they had received. So I'm really excited that we've got that going again, and it takes a lot of work. So I'm very appreciative of all the staff involved. The last thing I have is something called Language Line. I'm also excited about. We have our new multi-language educator this year, Rose Pompey, and she came to us with some experience of just being able to increase communication with families that were not English speaking. And she was able to help us kind of acquired this great deal where if we need to communicate with a non-English speaking family, we're able to, pay per minute for some services where their native language, we're able to communicate with families in their native language. So, just thinking of the equity work we're doing, that just multilingual me to increase that level of equity for multi-language learners. That's it on my end. If you have any questions.
Any questions? No, thank you. And Susan.
Good evening. I have just a few things I'd like to add to my written report. The first chunk of the report was about some state and federal grants, and we're excited that we are getting some mobile computer labs and doing some other things with grant funds. One of the grants that I forgot to mention is for our multilingual learners, as Lisa just mentioned, and also for students experiencing homelessness. And that's a $10,500 grant from the state of Maine. And we had a small group of folks meet together a couple of weeks ago to think about the best use for those funds within the allowable usages that the state and the federal government gave us, and are planning on using those funds to help kickstart our student welcoming and ambassador program so that we can really get that up and running as one of our equity action plan steps this winter. So we're excited about that. Today I met with a nice representative group of teachers who teach health and physical education that included some school counselors, and we had a good conversation around the upcoming health curriculum work. I think the meeting started with people feeling a bit overwhelmed, and that it was a heavy assignment to work on that curriculum again and to add the components to it that we want to see. But at the end of the meeting, we really left with a concrete action plan, and I think people feeling much better about the work that will begin on November 14th. Or excuse me, yeah, November 14th and then November 19th. So the diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership team met, and we're working on developing some subcommittees, and more information will be coming out about those two folks that are interested in working on the subcommittees, and working on identifying chairs of each of the groups so that some of that action plan can really be put into action now. And it's exciting to be at that point and see that work moving forward. And along the lines of professional development, I'll just share quickly that Katie Quirk and I were able to go to the Maine Educators of Gifted and Talented statewide conference on Friday. There was a great guest speaker from Purdue that talked about equity in gifted and talented in Chapter 104 programs. He gave us some food for thought, but also reassured us that we are on the right track in some changes that we're working on putting in place. And the afternoon speaker was about MTSS, so multi-tiered systems of student support, and how gifted and talented education fits into that system, and gave us some really great resources there. So that was a day well spent.
Great, thank you. Any questions? We'll go ahead and move on to superintendent's report.
Thank you. I'd just like to jump back up to acknowledgements for a moment. When Lisa mentioned the bike donation, we're going to check on the value of that to see if it needs to come back for a formal approval, but just to acknowledge, that donation formally through acknowledgements from Rose Bike. But also we recently were the benefactor of a donation from Bangor Savings Bank. They did a food drive for backpack program types of food and donated all of their collections to our schools to use in our schools backpack programs that some of the school offices do it in different ways, sending backpacks home on weekends with students who would benefit from having that support. So we thank you to Bangor Savings for considering our backpack program with their food drive. So moving on to the superintendent's report, I have two items. One is the enrollment report that I'll start with, and then we'll shift over to the discussion of awards and the data that we have to share with you tonight to kind of lead into our discussion on that topic. First, the enrollment summary. I provided in the folder that we published to you the summary of our enrollment data that was part of this is what's submitted to the state, and part of this is just data that we organized to share with the board this time of year. So the enrollment figures on here and the special education numbers are definitely part of the enrollment report that has to go to the state. There's a lot more included in that report that I just want to summarize a few key takeaways in that data. But then we also this time of year give you class size data. It's part of our class size policy that at different moments in the year, we provide the board with that information on class sizes. So the enrollment report, you can see, you don't have the comparative data here, but ASA is up in enrollment. They still are on an upward trend, showing really strong enrollment. I think, you know, overall that is, we're not too far from what we projected it to be based on the enrollment study projection of kindergarten, and that really came in right about where it was predicted to come in, which was, it continues to astound me that that process is holding true in a lot of ways to what we're seeing come through the door for, you know, kindergarten enrollments. I think the class sizes there, that group of students in 5th grade that's in the 2-section configuration leaves ASA next year. And, you know, presumably the size that comes into kindergarten is a full cohort needing 3 classes, leaves us with some choices or some decisions to be made. And one of those decisions is what we will do with that 3rd grade cohort going into 4th grade. We've talked about this at different points along, that we would look at that every year, and as particular when those students got into upper grades, consider whether it made sense to go to 3 instead of 4 classes. So that's just something to point out where that group is. That enrollment has stayed really strong and consistent over time. Has, since they were kindergartners and went to 1st grade, that's even grown by, I don't know, 6 or so. I think overall, maybe 5. I think it was at 58 when they were exiting kindergarten. So that's a you know, something that we'll be talking about as we plan for next year. In the middle school enrollment is lower than it was last year, but it's just because of, you know, cohorts that we have. It's slightly lower. It's not a lot lower. It's slightly lower than it was last year, but it's just right where we predicted it to be, right? It's not dropping suddenly, unexpectedly. That 6th grade group is a larger group, and you know, they are on the range of cohorts that we have. That 7th grade group is a smaller group, and the 6th grade group is a larger one. I don't think there was anything here that was unusual. The high school is right about where we thought it would be. Not exactly configured the way we predicted. There's been some change. That 11th grade cohort has come down in numbers. Some. The 10th grade group continues to go up slightly over time. I'm going to anticipate your question, Mark, about tuition numbers. Was that going to be a question you had? Probably.
Yes.
I told Lynn I wasn't going to just say I was going to wait for you to ask, but I just couldn't do it. I knew you would ask.
Fell into the trap, Mark.
Right. So we budgeted based on, in that 9th grade class, we budgeted based on 26 students, and what's interesting is that when we started school, we were at 35 in that class. And as of the October 1 report, we were at 43 in that class. And that just, I mean, I think that's important to see just how much those numbers fluctuate. I mean, from, you know, May, when we set our budget and decided this is the number we're going to budget based on, we had 26 and felt like that was a good estimate based on what we knew at that time. You know, it changed by 9 for the, you know, higher by the time school started. And then again, has risen even more through the first, you know, that's the first 6 weeks, 5 weeks of school. So, but also interesting, overall, we budgeted in high school, we budgeted as a district for 178 tuition students, and we have 180. So while this freshman class is a lot higher than we budgeted for, the other grades have had a lot of volatility. You know, more students leaving than coming in other grades, which is not atypical. There's a lot of volatility with tuition students. They just, in towns that have school choice, there often is, you know, more movement across high schools, particular at high school. We only have 4 students in our tuition numbers that are not in high school. 5, and they're all in middle school. So the class size data, obviously for the high school is more involved than it is for the other schools that are just a little more straightforward to calculate for us. The high school is, you know, different because it's based on a lot of different types of course offerings. And so you can see we've been organizing it this way the last year or so. Meredith pulled this data together, and I'm going to pass it over to her to see if she has anything that she wants to point out about these numbers. Yeah, I glanced back at last year's numbers, and there are some slight differences in places. I did not make note of those, but I didn't think it was, you know, a difference that just surprised me too much when I compared it to last year's numbers. Meredith, do you have anything that you would say about
I can add a
that?
little bit. I can add a little bit of dimension. I think that you know, we've added an incredible number of new courses this year, and that inevitably brings with it a degree of adjustment. You know, we'll be able to use going forward the information that we're learning this year to better calibrate our course offerings next year, or the number of sections that we run. You know, one example of that is that, you know, the newness of AP Seminar led to a lot more kids signing up front and have landed in that course ultimately, you know, because it took some time for there to be a sort of a collective understanding of what the course is going to involve. And as a result, our civics courses are especially large this year because, you know, the number of sections was created before a lot of that movement happened. You know, and that's something that we can, you know, potentially look at addressing for second semester, but it's probably going to be a problem that we are proactive about next year in you know, planning for a more accurate enrollment in AP Seminar. You know, and then the same or a similar issue in the math department, we have a very large section of Honors Algebra 2 because we didn't anticipate as much enrollment in that class as we've had. So that's you know, another place that we'll be more precise about in our planning for next year. At the same time, I think that you know, the similarity of average class sizes across departments is reassuring. We have, you know, as a former teacher who in some years would have close to 30 students in an English class, it is really exciting to see what our students at the high school get to experience with respect to student to teacher ratio in the average class year. You know, and that obviously isn't the rule, but I think that it is something that, you know, that we can really be proud of. I know that last year at this time, there was conversation about the English class size and, you know, what was that small enrollment? This year, we have a much smaller number of students in English 109. We're actually only running one section of it. We're running it next semester, which is a significant reduction. I can't remember if we had 3 or 4 sections of that running last year. But the class on there that is a class size of 4 is actually the advanced writing seminar class, which is a class for training student tutors to work in a student staff writing center. The size of that class, or I think that one reason that class is so small is because it it had a hiatus during the pandemic. We're bringing it back after a number of years away. And at the same time, reports from Erica are that, she's working with an incredibly talented group of tutors who are going to be a real asset to the building, not only the high school, but the middle school as well, once they get up and running. And I believe that that's something that will be happening, if not before winter break, then shortly thereafter. They're developing an online scheduling system that will allow students to schedule tutors with writers to schedule appointments with specific tutors. And, so I think that, even though we're, running a class of 4, I think that it is something that in the future years will be larger and is something that is going to be really fantastic for the student body once it's up and running. Unless folks have specific questions, that's all I have to share for now.
Any questions?
I have just a little more information to share. If you don't have any questions about anything I've presented so far. Here it is. So some of the other detailed information in the October 1 enrollment report and counts that we have to submit are very impactful of subsidy in a number of ways. And I just wanted to give you an idea of kind of the ups and downs of what we're seeing and just the, the total numbers compared to this past year, because those impact what subsidy we can expect next year if funding remained the same. Otherwise, I guess that's the caveat to that. Overall, our Orono student counts, so those are the students that we receive subsidy directly from the state and not from tuition towns. So that is down around just under 1%, like under 0.5%. So very slight change there. The economic status that's calculated from our free and reduced lunch, and there's specific subsidy from the state about that, but it also impacts our eligibility and amount we're eligible for from federal entitlement grants like Title I, Title II, and so forth. And that's up 8.6%. And I attribute that to just great work on the part of the office staff team, the administration, Ben Jacobson, to really work hard to get forms in and communicate the importance and why it's important in a climate where lunch is free anyway, but why it's important for us to have that information to help with, our state subsidy. So that was really great. Special ed counts. I mean, Lisa has given numbers and anecdotally, over time, but just the amount of eligible students, not counting those in a referral, we're up 10.8% compared to this time last year. Significant. Our EL or NL numbers are down by 63%, which, that is a very unpredictable number, because typically we have students coming in at different points in the year in that program, and the numbers are so small. So just, very slight changes in that have, pretty big percentage changes, but for subsidy, it's not a very impactful area for that program. And I think those are the main areas I wanted to highlight. So good news on our data for economic status, and I guess it just substantiates what special ed is feeling in terms of increased numbers, and how staffing challenges really can feel pretty, I was thinking the word desperate, but difficult, very difficult when you have, increased numbers and are struggling to keep staff for that program. So, but, kudos to Lisa for being very proactive to really strike while the iron's hot. When an application comes in, Lisa has them in like 30 minutes later doing an interview, trying to get them signing on the dotted line before, they go off and have opportunities elsewhere. And also for our staff to find ways to serve students, in times where we can't always be fully staffed. So this information is, we don't know what our subsidy will look like next spring in terms of the formula. There's, political questions that have to be answered that impact that, I think. But just the data itself looks strong. We're not in a place where we're seeing declining enrollments, or we're seeing, sudden drops in very impactful parts of our data for subsidies. So good news, I think, overall. That's all on that topic. If you don't have any questions.
Any questions? Okay.
So shifting to the awards topic, I've asked Richard Glencross and Sam, I believe, is going to report, or Sam and Meredith for the high school, on just so everyone has a framework of what the awards that are being given right now exactly are, and just a little bit about how the award system works, and any work that has been done recently to make adjustments to awards, so that people, if they have a fixed, notion of what happened with their children when, several years ago in middle school, they know that if anything's changed, and any information about what's in the planning stages right now for adjustments, because all of those things have been happening. After they have a chance to do that, Brian, I was going to turn over to you just to walk through the survey data to share kind of what that feedback was, and then answer any questions from the board. And I think then we can just transition into the board discussion on this topic. Does that sound good? Okay, and if there's anything else that you hope to hear, we can try to adjust to provide that. So in the board materials on the website and the board materials in your folders, there are some spreadsheets that Sam and Richard are going to just highlight. Everything's listed there, so they'll just kind of talk through the highlights of what you see on the spreadsheets where we've provided this information in writing. So Richard, do you want to start?
Absolutely, yes. I'll just start. Thanks, Meredith. So if we're looking at the same information on the spreadsheet for OMS, I'll just start at the top and kind of work my way down. There's not that many there, so I think we can get that. It might be a good efficient use. So the student of the month criteria is based on a number of things, but our foundational core values, right? So. And I think I listed those in the third column. I don't want to, read this to you, but I think we see students exemplifying those, trying hard, showing respect and caring for others, fairness, taking risks at school, like positive risks, academic risks and risks with overcoming personal obstacles, etc., those types of things. So since I've come to OMS, we really tried to align how we award the student of the month with the core values criteria, and we also have a method of keeping track of who receives the student of the month nominations. We try to spread that out and that students should not receive student of the month more than one time during their years at OMS. So we've made that those adjustments in my time at OMS over the last 3-4 years. The core values, the second one on those are little tickets that we give out to students each day. And it's like a little pat on the back for doing well, helping a peer, picking up trash, helping me move a table. Sometimes all kinds of different things. It's a little pat on the back for for students for doing good, representing our core values at school, and they're open to anybody, teacher, staff member sees a student doing well in that regard, and it's like a pat on the back. I announced the names on the morning announcements, and sometimes we do a drum roll and just have a little fun with it. So that's the core value slips, and we more recently we're starting to keep track. We have a spreadsheet, so we put marks that's shared with staff, so we can keep track of who earns the core value slip. Our goal being that every student gets core value at least once during the school year. So, okay, so that's values, and then moving on, we have our academic awards, and those are determined by report cards. We received some feedback a number of years back. We used to do an honor roll assembly. We still do an honor roll assembly at the end of each quarter, but we no longer present awards publicly. We during our honor roll assemblies, the entire school for doing well. We recognize sports teams, clubs. More recently, during the pandemic, we've been doing a live broadcast from my office. It's a lot of fun. Kids come down, and it's one of those things that we tried that turned out to be a real good idea that has carried over, now that we're not working under the same restrictions. So we try to celebrate the whole school and the whole student body during those celebrations. And so the honor roll certificates are a part of that, but they're given to students privately and without fanfare. But I think those are well earned, because we give them out to students who receive all A's and B's. Those students work hard and deserve that honor, but we don't do it publicly. And then in athletics, we give all students who participate in athletics receive a certificate of participation. I sign every one of those, and I make it a point to sign them with a good old pen, because I think I want each student to be recognized as a team member, and for all for their participation and involvement in the life of our school. So every student gets those. We have no awards other than those for athletics. And then the other awards on the list are our end of the year awards, and those are almost entirely based on academic achievement. Our scholarship awards are all based on student scholarship, and those are selected by teachers, and they're the students who perform at the top of the class in those various subject areas. We do have a number of we participate in a number of awards at the state level and the federal level. One of those being the Secretary of State Citizenship Award through the Department of Education. We link the there, and again, teachers and staff, based on that criteria, we nominate a student to receive the Secretary of State Award, and that award is given at our 8th grade recognition ceremony. The presidential awards for academic achievement are similar to our honor roll in that they are academic awards, and they are awarded to students, 8th grade students, at our recognition ceremony who have achieved all A's in the first 3 quarters of the school year. And the reason we picked the first 3 quarters is because the 4th quarter bumps up against, we have to order, and we have to be prepared for the ceremony before the end of the 4th quarter. So first 3 quarters, all A's receive the presidential award, and there's criteria for that award, and we also receive a letter from that we get to read at the recognition ceremony. We no longer give the Kiwanis Most Improved, but we do have the Most Improved. It was formerly the Kiwanis Most Improved Student, but last year we did recognize a student at our 8th grade recognition ceremony for the Most Improved, and And then, of course, the eighth grade certificates of completion are awarded to all eighth graders for successful completion of our eighth grade program of study. And the citizenship award is one that is those are awarded to individual students for showing good citizenship at school, and those are nominated by teachers, and that's sent home with their with the report card during quarters 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions for Richard about any of that information?
I had a question. This could apply to the high school or the middle school, but student of the month. I've been in this district for 12 years and I still don't quite understand the connection, right? That's an award within the school. And
Yes,
yet I see it show up in the Penobscot Times, right, in the newspaper, I think.
we used to do that, Brian. That's no longer, that has stopped, a couple of years now in the Penobscot Times. Yeah.
It does show up on the town billboard, the
So,
electronic. one.
yeah, now it's on the town billboards. Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you. Anything else
Any
for
other
Richard?
questions? Okay, Sam, you want to review the high school information?
Yes, and I just want to double check. You guys can hear me, right? I had to get a new headset, so I just want to make sure. Meredith, please, Diamond, please jump in at any point if you'd like. This past spring, I had the privilege of pulling together some of our staff, of which it was open to any staff member that wanted to be a part of the group, to form a student award review committee. And that committee was in the goal of what this discussion's about, is really looking at all of the awards that we give students, and really taking a thorough deep dive as to why we give them, what their criteria is, what the process is, et cetera. So that group helped also to put together the spreadsheet that you guys are viewing, which I will use Richard's method, I guess, to go right down through it and tell you where we are at this point, the change that was made by the committee since last spring. And then for some, we already are talking, we just recently had a meeting about things we want to address. I think our next meeting's either next week or the week after, and begin the work moving forward. With student of the month, pretty much as Richard said, we have really looked at having more consistent criteria in which to for staff to nominate a student, and so those are listed there. And the nominations are done in a Google form anonymously by the staff, and then another Google form is utilized for staff to vote for the student. And the idea with these is, as well as apparently in the middle school, is that a student will win this award or recognition once in their high school career. This is, we see, as an area for students of many interests, many towns in which they live in, many capabilities, many services, economic backgrounds, whatever, can all get recognized for the hard work that they're doing at Orono High School and for the achievements that they're making. And that the winners are put up outside the cafeteria. They get to write up a little write-up about themselves and a picture. And as we also do a staff of the month at the same time. I'm going to skip student of the year for right now. Book awards was another area that the committee really looked at last year. Book awards are given out at the end of the school year. And one of the major changes that was made is each content would nominate a student. This is of academic high achievement within their content area. And in the past, a certain student may win a book award more than once. So a student could get 3 different book awards at the same ceremony for the same year. This past year, we wanted to recognize the fact that we have many outstanding academic success in our student body. And so if a student were to win a book award and then were nominated for other content areas, that was listed within the sleeve or in the back cover of the book, that they received it for that content, but was also nominated for other contents as well. So the student was well aware that they were recognized in other areas, but it allowed us to truly recognize the numerous high achieving students we have at Orono High School. And those book awards are given out all 4 grade levels. grades 9 through 11 in our award ceremony at the last day previous to finals, and then the 12th graders during baccalaureate. Then the student of the year and the activity award, which is further down, so I apologize, I'm not quite going in order. Those are given to students of the 12th grade. Those are also previously been voted upon by our staff through a nomination process. This past year, we also started that process of doing that with the Google Forms, and did have some success with that last year. But that is, both of those awards are areas that our awards committee wants to look at moving forward. We really want to look and make sure that the criteria is well set and understood, as well as that the process is communicated to ensure that all staff are, all students are nominated for those awards, and it's clear as to why, and then staff can have a more thorough voting process, and as to, if they haven't been able to get to know that student very well, because that can happen at the high school level, they'll know that student through the eyes of their accomplishments and participations in the school. Those are given to 12th grade students also at baccalaureate evening, and is an award that's given in front of their class as an achievement at the end of their 4 years. A lot of the next few awards are some of our athletic awards, which for many of these have been traditions within our school. Like the Frederick Burpee Award is given to a junior athlete that demonstrates sportsmanship and leadership and being a positive teammate. The coaches in the ATC are the ones that voted on it, and they get the student is again shared or recognized during the awards at the end of the year. And they get this lovely sweater that's been knitted by a community member. It's pretty amazing, pretty itchy, but pretty amazing. Then the riot.
E stands for?
What
I'm
does
sorry, what?
ATC What does ATC stand for?
Athletic 10 conference. Is that what it is? I think pretty sure that's what it is. Something like athletic, isn't that, or at something 10 conference? I can ask Mike Archer about that.
It's a certified athletic, it's the certified athletic trainer certified.
Trainer. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Shauna.
So Sherry, the trainer.
Then we have the male and female
Sam,
athlete.
Sam,
Yes.
we lost your video.
Oh. I apologize. I wasn't looking at it, so my apologies. We then have the male and female athletes of the year, where 2 athletes are selected for, again, pretty outstanding involvement in leadership and contribution to the athletic program. Same group of people. They do a ballot system. I will say that Mike has moved the ballot systems for all of those awards to Google as well, a Google form, like nomination process and voting process. As since the pandemic, and he plans on moving and sticking with that moving forward. Then there's some scholarships and athletic awards that are from previous athletes in our community, and some scholarships that is moved forward from them, such as the Como Family Scholarship and the Joel Paul Scholar Athlete Awards. Our Wall of Fame posters. These are changed throughout the year. This is like a pretty big deal for the students. The coaching staff of each sport will choose a 12th grade generally. Sometimes if there isn't a 12th grade student, an 11th grade student might be chosen to have their portrait of that sport displayed on our Wall of Fame. For any of you who have walked through up towards our gymnasium, there's all these posters of the kids up on the walls, and they're a pretty big highlight for visiting teams as well. They always seem to draw attention there, and then they're up there till the next season when another athlete is chosen for that season, and then the poster goes back to the student. The MVP, Most Improved in Coaches Award for each sport are given, as well as participation certificates and varsity letters and such at the end of each season by the coaches. Then, and Shauna's here, so she could probably speak better to the Social Studies Awards. But those are 2 social studies awards that the social studies department recommends, and then the principal selects. Those are the Social Studies Youth Senate and the Dirigo State. And the criteria and selection process is determined by those groups of agencies, and you can click on those if you would like to look at those. And then the MPA Principals Award is one that's decided by the co-principals. The criteria is from the MPA, which is Academic Excellence, Outstanding School Citizenship, and Leadership. And together now, which is really good, Meredith and I discuss and look at each year which students that we choose we feel would be a good nomination for that award. And it's given to the student at baccalaureate evening. Moving forward, like I said, we want to look at the Activity Award and Student of the Year awards and the criterias and the reasons in which students are chosen for those. We also, we had top of the survey that you guys are going to review and discuss tonight, sent out by you and Meredith Higgins. We polled, the committee polled our high school staff and kind of to see what they thought about some of our awards and changes that they felt would make them valuable and worthwhile for the students. And one such thing was we have an unsung hero award, which wasn't included in the spreadsheet, so we apologize. Those are chosen right now, currently only during the fall seasons. And each coaching staff of each sport chooses an unsung hero, someone who really is a huge participant within their program and their team's success, but possibly isn't the one that's, up in the front and recognized as often, but is very valuable. There's a proposal and our desire to look forward to doing that in all 3 seasons. So the winter season and the spring season as well. We also wanted to talk about the adding, and I've begun this process with our performing arts people, looking at the Red Riot medallions also happening for the performing arts. So students right now who get an Iron Red Riot medallion for being in 3 sports seasons and having an 85 or above average, we are now wanting to move that forward and having that for the performing arts. It'll be a different medallion with a different title, but the same idea with the students that participate in 3 of our performing arts opportunities and co-curricular activities will be able to earn a medallion with an 85 or above average as well. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, but that's a lot of the work that we've been doing thus far, and I'm welcome to answer any questions. Meredith, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Oh, you did a great job, Sam.
And Shauna chipped in, which was great because she's been one of the active members of our committee. So thank you, Shauna.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board?
I have a question, and it occurred to me it applies to Richard as well. So being new to the board, when did you start doing this sort of reevaluation, and what led either school to consider these reevaluations, to pull together these groups of teachers to start this work?
I can start that, Kevin. I would say, 3 or 4 years ago here, we first started revamping, making a few things. The first big change was our change to the recognition ceremony at the end of each quarter. We stopped doing the public presentation honor roll to kids and moved to giving them privately. So I'd say that was about 3 years ago when we first did that. And the reason for that we started examining our awards, making some adjustments, was because just before the pandemic, I would say, and this is thinking back, we received some feedback on awards, and I was new to OMS then, and that discussion was kind of going around a bit, and so we looked at a few things, made a few adjustments at that time.
I think for us, it was similar in the sense that we, we're hearing some feedback and some areas in which we should consider changing some of our awards criteria and process and delivery. But also, we as a staff, I think the pandemic, I like to say that there are some positive things that came out of the pandemic. And one of them was that in needing to look at how we were doing awards at the end, reevaluating how we were doing graduation, trying to figure out how to still have some traditions and some things that families and kids look forward to in their high school careers. One of them was the awards, and how do we give those out, which gave us an opportunity to talk and really think about, well, what do we want to do with those? And are there areas that we want to change? Are there things that we need to shore up? Are there things that we maybe need to clarify? And also the recognition that, there are many students in our school from, like, as I said earlier, varying levels, varying backgrounds, varying home lives, varying everything, that work hard and trying to ensure that we are recognizing our students for their dedication and work throughout their high school career. In many capacities. And so the group and our desire to have a committee was because we feel, and I know I'm not speaking for Meredith, I know we agree that we like to bring together minds and form teams so that we can work together to really make the best offer for our students and staff at OHS as much as possible.
Thank you.
Any other questions about awards that are being given or what's being considered or has been adjusted?
I don't have a question, but just a comment that I do appreciate that, a lot of thought and a lot of work has gone into awards over the last several years, over and above COVID and survival. The fact that work went on over the last couple of years just makes it that much harder, or more impressive, or more appreciated. But I don't know how much people realize that this was even being talked about or addressed, but they're just wanted to express appreciation to the principals and the teachers who put time and energy into addressing and thinking this through. And
I just want to add to that, it was done voluntarily too, right? Like Richard said, there was some feedback that they received that, maybe things weren't, as people would like. And, the board wasn't involved at that time, and they took it upon themselves to kind of adjust things on their own before any of this formal process got involved. So there's, credit due for that too.
anything else from you, Meredith?
No, I would just say, it's really been incremental, I would say, different changes along the way. And I think, sometimes it was from like parent feedback about, some of the practices, and really just saying, have you considered this and this impact, and then us talking about it. And other times it's, the middle schools had a discussion that we say to the high school, hey, we received this feedback and had this discussion. Have you all thought about that as well? So, I think, one thing at one school that they're grappling with thinking about, we talk as a group and the high school begins talking about it. So it's happened through a number of avenues, but I think it starts really with like new people coming on board and saying, why are we doing things this way? Or a parent saying, I'd like you to consider this. So I think it's a number of different kind of ways that this dialogue has started and then yielded, the results we've talked about tonight. So.
Okay, I guess, so I was just going to recap. You all have the details graphs, and it's not available to the public because specific student names and staff and things were mentioned. So, but we did have, and the board has read in detail all of the detailed comments and feedback that people provided as well. So I wanted to show you that that's been read. Let's see, some things to say. This is among the highest participation rate surveys that we've done. Certainly for students, I can't recall, I'm not going to swear it's a record, but I can't recall another survey issued from the board level or the district level that had this highest student participation. 84 students. We had 145 parents. That's on the high end too. Sometimes we see that with principal and superintendent surveys, but that's on the high end. And we had 38 staff and teachers and employees, which is also on the high end. So, that's about a 40% rate for the employees, and the students. Well, it's 10% of all students, but you wouldn't expect kindergartners to fill this out. You know, it's probably more like 20 or 30% of middle school and high school. So, you know, it's not 100%. It's not a scientifically designed stratified sample that is guaranteed to be representative, but it's about as good a data as we get to work with in this district. If I could broadly summarize, in general, there was a lot more expression of the reasons why to give awards were in the 60 to 80%. The reasons not to give awards were typically in the 20, 30, 40%. Yeah, there was some difference, and certainly I think this is one of some of the bigger differences among stakeholders. So for example, students perceive motivation as a fairly important reason, about 80% to give awards. I think parents and employees were less committed to motivation as a reason to give awards and more motivated to expressions of values and recognition of effort. But you could parse that. And then, you know, to get to the punchline, I think there were opinions in all areas. And if you read the comments, there were strong opinions across all ends of the spectrum. But if you're just, you know, counting the balance of opinion, it's pretty strongly tilted towards, you know, we used a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is a definitely eliminate, 3 is a neutral, and 5 was a definitely keep. For each individual award, it's very strongly skewed in the kind of 4 to 5 definitely keep range across stakeholder groups and across awards. I think it's fair to say that the students and the staff felt a little bit more strongly in that direction than the parents, but you know, the parents were in that direction as well. Comparing across awards, I think it's probably fair to say that the student of the month and also the student of the year and athlete of the year were the least favorite. That said, they still had, you know, net fairly strongly balanced on the positive keep side of things. And in particular, the parents, I think, were the students and the staff were still pretty strongly positive about the student of the month, student of the year, athlete of the year. The parents, to be honest, that's the closest we got to mix. They still, well, yeah, that's the closest we got to completely balanced, like keep drop being balanced was parents on the student of the month, student of the year, athlete of the year awards. All the other categories, different stakeholder groups, different awards, had a pretty strong balance towards the keep side of things. You can look at things in more detail, so I'm not gonna, you know, and Noah did a nice thing where he broke it out by age group of the respondent or, you know, student that the parent was responding and different awards. And, you know, you can slice and dice this data, but the net, I think, boils down to kind of what I identified. Yeah, so I think maybe that ends the report section of things, if you're okay with that, Meredith. Then we'll move on to the board discussion side of this. You know, just to frame it, we don't, you know, this board traditionally has not, barring an emergency like COVID, implemented any big change like this in a single board meeting. If this were to head towards a big change, like getting rid of awards, we kind of have a tradition of spreading it across the meeting so that people aren't caught by surprise. I don't know that we are headed to a big change, but if we were, that would be something I would want to stick to. Meredith and I both, I think, felt that this was better as a discussion. If there's a clear consensus, to be perfectly honest, I think if there's a clear consensus, I would be happy trusting the administration to implement the consensus, but there's a majority of the board that wants to make a motion and take a vote on something, we can do that. But for starters, I think we need to have a discussion and see if there is a consensus that emerges, and then we can figure out what to do from there. But if we were to take a drastic vote, to me, a drastic vote would be something like get rid of awards. I would definitely stretch it across a couple of meetings. Short of that, start with the discussion. If people are happy, you know, if some consensus items emerge and people are happy with letting the administration implement that, we have, you know, we have a strong track record. I have no reason not to think that would happen, but if some of the board wants to go on the record, we can turn it into a vote too. But first thing would be to just start with discussion. I don't know, I often go first, but I know there are other people with stronger opinions on this, so I'm happy to let somebody else go first if they want to. No?
Fair. Yeah, no, I just want to start, thanks for everyone that sort of put a lot into this. And, I've read a lot over the last couple months in the literature and reading books and trying to read through all this and trying to get a sense for where things stand. And, I mean, it's like we all clearly just want to be here to, motivate our students, right? And see that they excel and see that they get jobs and, that they go to college. And I think we're all like on the same page about that. I guess we sort of see things differently in terms of like what the best way is to move around awards for doing that. And so I guess, I see this, some folks see this as like a distraction maybe, but like I see this as really centrally important to like what we're doing in education and like what our mission is. And I guess for me, it's like I don't remember most of my life, like the last year or day, but like I have these like things that happen, like individual stories and episodes and that replay in my head and frame my thinking about who I am as a person and how I fit into society and sort of inform what I choose to do. And I feel like these are the moments we're talking about. They're few and far between, like these award ceremonies, but they like are really informative for how students see themselves and hold themselves and connect to the community, which is why it doesn't happen every day, but it feels really important. So I'm glad we're sort of taking the time to think carefully about it. And I guess, I've done all this, reading about like, the research on showing that awards sort of do the opposite of what we want. But I want to actually want to share. Can I share my screen? Is that to show this one little
It was like, you said it was 1 or 2 minutes,
it's
right?
like, yeah, and I can just talk over it just to show you. It's basically an example of, there's this idea that award ceremonies are how things are done, and this is like the only way we can celebrate and motivate our students. And I've been in schools where we don't do that, and it's a very cohesive and education focused group of students that are working really hard. And I reached out to this principal at a middle school who 8 years ago, they did away with awards. They had the same system we had, same sort of structure, and they got together and decided we were going to just get rid of awards completely. And there was like some pushback at first, but they did it. They implemented a new system, which does all the same things. So it's not just getting rid of awards, but it's moving towards a different model to do the things we want to do. And in the 8 years since, they've had no complaints, and it's really been like a big, huge win for the community. So there's just this one, I just like want to show a visual of what they did instead. It's just like a walkthrough of, they did this celebration thing.
So you said it was a minute or two, right?
Yeah, it's like yeah.
So, I mean, I think the board has had a chance to see it, but I think it'd be good to put it into the public discussion unless somebody on the board objects to just
I
sharing
think
it.
you have permission if you want to try.
Is that okay? So I'm basically like what I'm sharing is a Twitter post from the it says disabled participant screen sharing. The host uses this screen. It's a post again from the principal who I spoke with on the phone for an hour about how it worked for her and what she was able to do. And oh yeah, no, I got it. And so what I'm going to show you here is this is just like, it's not the best image. It's just like this Twitter post where she has like a high-speed walkthrough, and maybe it won't even work on Zoom because the internet is so laggy. But basically what they did, instead of an award ceremony at the end of the year, they had if they call it a student showcase of success. So instead of students being selected for an award from teachers, the students all designed essentially their own awards, and they all decided what they wanted to be celebrated for, and they worked over the course of the year on what their goals were, what they wanted to achieve, and at the end they set up throughout the school on this one day, the showcase, what it is they had achieved, a display of it, whether it's like, you can see there's music, some people excelled in music, some people excelled in sports, and some people did writing or art or whatever, some people wrote computer programs or gaming, all the sorts of varied ways that students were succeeding academically and outside of school. And they each wrote about it. So like you write a paragraph about what it is you've done, and you display it in there, and then you set up, and the whole school comes through, and instead of sort of like this awkward impersonal award ceremony thing, you actually, it's a very personal and very meaningful, like each student gets to sit there and the whole community comes by. It's a grandparents and parents come through, the other student classmates come through and all give the sort of verbal positive feedback and recognition that in the literature is the one thing that all researchers agree on is the best way to actually motivate students, which is specific, personal, positive feedback that and discussion of the work that you've done that is self-led and is meaningful. And that's, you know, that's how.
Sorry, we're looping if you wanted to stop.
Oh, yeah.
it, so people can see faces again.
Yeah, stop share. I think you got a sense for like basically what it looks like. So it's you know, it's this other model of celebrating, of motivating, of defining our values, of you know, getting students ready to sell themselves in the workplace. Because you know, you think about going to college, being able to articulate your own perspective in an essay and who you are and what you stand for in it, like an essay, is way more valuable than like listing an award and having some, you know, extrinsic thing handed to you. And so I think it's, you know, it's, and, you know, talking with Paula, the other principal, who, again, she's happy to sort of help, like, talk to us about ways, you know, this is just one model. Of course, there's other models. There's this whole book about other models of ways you can do it, but it's an example of like how we can achieve the things we value as a community that aligns with the research on what motivates students and what doesn't, and doesn't have all the negative things that awards carry with them. And you know, there's this, she had this one story of a student who was this Indigenous student, this little boy who couldn't read, right? And so he was not going to get awarded in the way their award structure is set up. But in this new model, he didn't, you know, he didn't know what he could do. And she had a conversation with him, and he's in his community. He's like, he does a lot of hunting and he's like really good at it. And so he was able to bring that in as the thing that he showed off, and he felt connected with the community. And it was a real moment of like him bringing himself in and being recognized by the community. So yeah, they have lots of sort of stories about how it works in that way. So, you know, I think that, you know, it just moves away from, we haven't gotten to like all the problems with awards that like the research shows, you know, in terms of demotivating students and stuff like that. But like, you know, for me, I guess I do want to talk a little bit about that, having read a lot about it. But you know, like the thing that's most important to me in thinking about awards and why I think I would like to see us move away from the way they're done now is, you know, it's connected to like the DEI work. And it's sort of this, I mean, you know, like we've all had this moment like in our lives, this experience where we've gone out and we've just excelled at something, and we've done something so wonderful that we've seen how smart we are, how great we are at like something we've done, and done something for someone else or done something for the community. And like, it's just, nobody sees it. You know, nobody values it. Nobody recognizes your achievement, or you just feel unseen because, you know, you've done this thing for somebody and it's just like falls into empty space. And there's this feeling of like loneliness and sort of disconnect and self-doubt that I think we understand that sort of feeling. And you know, for some of us, I think that this happens more than others. I think if we are outside of the sort of dominant, like in a classroom setting, we don't connect with the teacher and we are consistently not seen, it sort of has this everyday effect of our work not being seen. And I think, you know, from a teaching perspective, those of us who taught, I think, know like this, you know, we value like how well we connect with our students and how well we can see them and bring them along. But I think we've also all had that experience of like, there's the student that's like not doing very well and you think little of them, and then suddenly you learn something new about them and it changes your frame and you see, oh my gosh, like how did they even show up to the classroom given that, you know, the parents just died or whatever, and you suddenly like see that student and see who they are. And for me, like those moments, I mean, I have some this semester that just happened. It's like, how many, I know that I'm missing most of my students and then I'm not really seeing them, and that it just feels like I don't want to be the one to be making the decision about like who should be getting the award and who shouldn't. I don't feel like I can really see into their hearts and see like, see them. And I think as the student who's consistently overlooked and not seen and feels because I'm not like my teacher, because I am not the same gender identity, or I just don't think in the same way, or I'm not connected to the social structure, or whatever it is that marginalizes me in the classroom. It's like having that over and over again, it makes me, I see the other students getting recognized because they fit in, and it's either I drop out, I try less, I feel like I'll never fit into this classroom, or maybe I try really hard to be like the rest of the community so that I can like be that thing that the teacher wants me to be. And I think, these are the things that, this is for me, like the problem with teachers choosing who should be awarded for what. And like, that's what the research shows too, is like this sort of, we can't really know our students. And when we try to tell them who should be awarded for what, it gets in the middle and makes the mess of things. And it alienates some students, and it sort of maybe lifts some up, and it's just kind of a mess. And I don't know, I think that, what works better and what the literature shows is that like, when you let students self-lead, when you let students decide for themselves what they want to do and recognize their own achievements and make their own plans, they're more motivated. And we talk about like lifelong learning as one of our main goals in the book on the board sheet. And this classic experiment with the markers that like if you give children award or reward for coloring with markers, and then you let other students try color with markers with no reward. Well, after you stop giving rewards, the students who are given the rewards, they no longer want to play with markers because markers are just a means to an extrinsic sort of value. Whereas the ones that were just given free rein, they play with them longer, they enjoy them, they are more creative. And I mean, that's a simplistic sort of study, but it's been shown, there's this meta-analysis I sent out, which has 120 studies in it of things like this, and they're not all perfect, they're not all exactly like what we're talking about, but they all point to the same general thing that like when you have these extrinsic reward systems or rewards, however you want to frame it, like it demotivates students. And it, in some cases, there's a study with attendance awards where like you give out attendance awards. This was a controlled study, one of the best done like in this system of awards. And when you gave out awards, the students who got awards stopped, or like everybody stopped showing up essentially. You had less attendance because when you got an award, it signaled that you were outperforming what was expected of you. And there's this sort of group dynamics of you don't want to outperform what the school is thinking of you, and you're judging yourself based on this bar. Similar things have been shown with testing, with performance in math exams. When you show where students are at, it tends to lower success and lower like scores. So there's like just a bunch of literature that's sort of at the very best questioning whether these awards do anything, and probably they are demotivating. And that's just like on the motivation front. And then there's a lot of evidence that it's creating these DEI inclusivity problems. And I just think, I think it's harming the students. I think nobody wants to be doing that. And there are better ways to do this, to motivate, to bring students forward and to not sort of exclude. So I don't know, I have more I could say, but like that's where I'm at. I would love to see us move in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Can I offer a perspective, Brian?
Please go ahead.
So just anecdotally, I think it's worth sharing just something from this last month's Student of the Month Award here at Orono High School. And I know that this is something that Sam has shared, but as context for those who may have not been part of the communications, Student of the Month here, teachers nominate, they give narrative explanations for their nominations. And then faculty vote based not on just their perception of the student, based on their name, but based on the narratives provided by other faculty members. And I would imagine that most folks at Orono High School would say that the list of nominations often presents a very wide and diverse group of people, that illustrates pockets of students in this building being seen and recognized for who they are and what they're doing in a way that is not in that traditional, top 5%, top 10%. Occasionally there are those students, right, who are being recognized for achievement only, but in my time in this building, I've noticed that the percentage that those students represent is less and less. But this past month, we had a student win, student of the month for his grade, who is really just a bright light for those folks in the building who get to come in contact with him, but in a way that doesn't necessarily fit any of those traditional parameters. And I got to be in the guidance office when Heidi told him that he had won, and he was blown away. And he was, I could tell from the look on his face that this is going to be a moment that this student remembered, likely anytime he reflected back on high school. And he went through the office, and everybody in the office knew that he had won this, and everybody is congratulating him. And he comes out to the front, and Just Fine congratulates him, and the students around him get to congratulate him. And this is not a student who fits in any of those, those traditional parameters, right? This is a student who clearly felt seen and recognized because of this one award. And when I asked him if he was surprised that he had won, he said, well, actually, I kind of figured that I would win eventually because of how much I try to help everyone out. And in some ways, Noah, I see that as a counterpoint to some of the things that you're saying, in that, on the one hand, we could say that there's, or that there is the assertion that awards make students feel invisible, right? Some students feel invisible. And this is an example of a student who was being recognized for something about himself that he was clearly putting effort and energy into, right? That we don't necessarily have an avenue for acknowledging in the day-to-day life of school. But he was investing in it. And I, having seen him, I can say that he invested in this identity as someone who helps others every single day across contexts. And his receipt of Student of the Month was a validation of that identity and a recognition of it that was public, and that he could see aligned with who he was. And when I think about the best example of what the Student of the Month award at Orono High School does, that's the image that I have in my mind.
Why don't we give other people chances to? Do you have something quick now?
Just a real quick response. I just to say, like, I hear that, and I hear that sounds like a wonderful opportunity for that student. I guess what I'm speaking to are all the other students that you can't award every student that because it's 12th year, right? And so, like, the students that aren't getting this.
So I'll go ahead and go next. So some awards, Student of the Year, goes to one student out of 60, 80, 100 people, but Student of the Month actually can go to a very substantial fraction of the school at some point in time. And honor roll is, we know it doesn't go to every student, but it's potentially available to every student. So there, I think it's important not to paint all the awards with a single brush. Having read the survey, not just, looked at the numbers, but the comments, it's very clear to me different people experience awards differently. There are people for whom awards are traumatic. There are people for whom awards are motivating. There are people for whom awards are, identity defining, like you were just talking about, Meredith, right? So, it's kind of the nature of education that you have a bunch of different students, and you're not going to meet every student every single time perfectly, right? As much as that's the goal. There's just no other way to say it. We have students for whom awards are demotivating. We have students for whom awards are motivating. And there are some compelling anecdotes on both those sides, you know, and some, I appreciate people taking the time to share them. That said, you know, so when those kind of anecdotes become kind of contradictory, I started to look at more, you know, quantitative data. I have to say, and I already shared this with you, Noah, but I read the literature pretty differently. So that the meta-analysis contrasts positive feedback from a teacher, positive verbal feedback from a teacher against not awards, but rewards. And when you dig into the rewards, the typical examples of rewards are these things like you get a star on a chart in front of the class every time you read a book, right? That's a very different thing. First of all, that's K through 5 typically, which we're not even talking about. Second of all, that's like a day in, day out kind of daily work habit rewards, not semester or year-wide recognition of achievement. And also the study very concretely talks about tangible rewards versus verbal feedback, right? And so, and the other category, so there's some studies that have done very high stakes with high school students, $500 if you meet the requirements to graduate. And that was in the tangible rewards category. And it did, I agree with you about this. I disagree about what the interpretation, but the net result was the positive verbal feedback was motivating for students, and the tangible rewards for behavior was demotivating, right? But when we talk about student of the year, is that a gold star on the wall, or is that a positive verbal feedback from a teacher? It's just not as clear to me how that research applies to what we're talking about. I only found one paper that directly talked about awards, and it specifically talked about Student of the Month awards. And, you know, so it's one study versus the 120, but it feels more relevant. It, to be perfectly honest, it showed awards had no impact. The things that mattered were the grades received, the quality of the teacher they interacted with, being placed in an accelerated math class, right? It was these more academic constructs, of which verbal feedback from teachers was certainly a big piece of it. But you know, the effect size was like 10, 50 times bigger than the effect size of Student of the Month awards. And so that's one place, quantitative place. I read it differently than you do. It's mostly in the interpretation. But you know, the other places we went to the trouble of doing this survey, and I just would have a very hard time when students, especially, you know, I care about the parent and the teacher opinions too. And in this case, they more or less align. The parents were a little less strong, but they more or less align. But students in particular, I have a very hard time, you know, going back to the students and saying, you know, I, a 56-year-old guy sitting on a board who hasn't been in school, you know, middle school or high school for 40 years, knows better about what works for you or doesn't work for you than the students themselves who self-report. You know, again, there are stories of extremely negative and extremely positive reports. There's also a lot of stories of, you know, it just doesn't affect me that much and I feel good for the kids who get it. That seemed like the gestalt. I didn't do a formal, you know, qualitative textual analysis, but just my reading it, that's what I get out as the gestalt. And, you know, the students are pretty overwhelmingly, you know, 60% definitely keep, another 20% keep. That's 80% on the keep side of things. Depends on the award, but I don't know where I sit. I don't find the literature having a strong contradiction to the student opinions, and I don't know where I sit as a board member, you know, in general, overriding parents and teachers, but especially overriding students about something that's directly given to students. So that's where I have a hard time with a big fix, like getting rid of awards. That said, nothing's perfect. I'm always open to tweaking everything we do in these schools, right? Way back, the first time I ran for board, I talked about the notion of continuous improvement. I think some people in education are offended by that, but we can always do better. And I think we should always try to do better. And I feel like a lot of effort has been going into doing these awards better. And I think maybe out of this survey, there's more that comes that could be doing better. I personally liked what I saw about the student celebration. Was that middle school kids? Yeah, to me, it feels more like a middle school thing than a high school thing. I'm not sure that I would I think about some of the high school students I know. I'm not sure we necessarily get full buy-in at the high school, but you know, the middle school, but I don't see that as either or. I could see that as something that could happen in addition to the existing award system. I'm personally pretty conscious. Doesn't matter, this won't mean anything to anybody, but I sit on the awards committee for one of my national professional societies. And I'm very conscious that it's limited by the nominations you get. So, you know, the committee, the vote's gonna have the best of intentions about who gets the award, but if you don't get nominations, the nominations are an area that are subject to implicit bias. So it's not a critique, you know, but I'm aware that, for example, at the level that I'm sitting on an awards committee, we often get 10 men nominated and 1 woman nominated. And the next higher level up, the National Science Foundation kind of infamously gave out 12 straight awards to men. And if you talk to them, they're like, well, let's go back to the nominations. And so nominations are something that I think we can always look at to do better, because they are the place where I think committees do a fairly balanced job about thinking about that. But the nomination process, where people are just nominating a single candidate at a time, that's a place where bias seeps in. So I think, you know, I'm open to talking about that process. I think it jumps out to me that the Student of the Month award was the least popular of our awards, and that, to be honest, that doesn't surprise me. I've been hearing complaints about Student of the Month for 8 years, right? As Jake was getting at, some of the feedback predates anything that's happened recently. I don't know. I don't see a majority who want to get rid of it, and you know, school administration is not always a vote of the popular vote, but I don't necessarily see getting rid of it. But I think Student of the Month has suffered from a lack of clear criteria, right? Or maybe it now has clear criteria as implemented at middle school and high school, but the community doesn't understand what those criteria are. So maybe it's a communication. So all of which is to say, I find individuals that both, you know, love and hate awards, but when I think about the broad sweep across the district, I don't find research that points to getting rid of awards, and our own surveys pretty strongly point to keeping awards. So I'm kind of a place like, I would like to keep the conversation going about how can we do awards better, recognizing that we've already been having that conversation and taking action, but I'd be, you know, I'd like to keep that conversation going because I think we always can do better. I identified a few specific areas that, you know, I would like to look at. Like, I don't think student self-recognition is antithetical to awards. I think we can do both at the same time. I think we should always be scrutinizing our nomination process for implicit bias. And I think we need to have a conversation, and maybe the answer is a communication problem, not a process problem, but I think there's something still broken about the Student of the Month awards, and to a lesser degree, the Student of the Year and the Athlete of the Year. And like I say, it may not be the process, it may be the communication and understanding in the community, but I think there's work to do in those. So those are the 3 areas that I come down on tweaking. And those are 3 areas I would put forward potentially for tweaking. Anybody else have a thought?
I guess I'll jump in at this point. I mean, I'm in pretty much the same spot as Brian is on this. You know, I think the data are, from the survey data that we conduct, are pretty overwhelming, especially among the students and the staff. And I would also agree with Brian that I'm more concerned with the student perspective on this. Students are overwhelmingly in favor of keeping the awards. And I think their perspective on this is pretty important. I will say this, in the time that I've been on the board, it's very rare that I've had students come up to me to talk to me about a particular issue. I've had a number of students come up to talk to me about this, and to a person, they were all very much in favor of keeping the award system in place, and they were you know, concerned that something was going to be done there. So I think the survey data are pretty clear. I would also say, I mean, I did read the 2 peer-reviewed studies you sent around. I don't think I would agree with your characterization that, you know, the literature points consistently in one direction. I don't think it does. The whole meta-analysis thing has not made it into political science yet, so I'm not as familiar with those pieces. But when I read these, it seems to me there's some pretty serious methodological problems with a lot of these. So I wouldn't say at all. Again, I didn't read the non-peer reviewed stuff, but the peer reviewed pieces you sent along, I don't think point overwhelmingly in the direction of rewards are problematic. I think it's a pretty mixed bag. And I think there's some methodological issues there that would kind of give me pause on how I'm interpreting those data. I also agree with Brian that we can always do better, right? And I think, you know, the ongoing efforts at both the middle school and the high school are indicative of that. You know, anybody who's known me long enough knows that I've had particular concerns for a number of years as student of the month, top of the list. And I think that can continue to be improved. I think as long as we have clear objective criteria in place, that we constantly kind of monitor those criteria for implicit bias, but also other concerns as well. And that the processes we have in place are as transparent as they can possibly be without violating any kind of privacy concerns, then I'm fully comfortable keeping the current system that we have in place, but continuing the process of how can we do it better. I'm also certainly supportive of adding additional types or opportunities for recognition so that more students can be recognized for the great things that we know they're all accomplishing. So I'm certainly not saying we can't add anything else. I think adding things is certainly something we should look into. So that's where I am.
So when we first started this, before we sent out the survey, I remember saying I'd be interested in hearing what the students have to say, because it's really about them, right? And the information you sent out, I was glad that the comments were first and then afterwards were the scores. So I followed it in that order for each group. And as I was reading, the students were first, so I was reading through and I kind of figured I'd know what the scores would be based on the comments, and that was the case. And then that followed with the parents, and that followed with the staff. And the notes that I took down in regards to that, Brian, were pretty similar to what you had, is that when I read the comments and looked at the scores, the students and the staff are overwhelmingly in support of the current process we have now. The parents were in favor of, but not as strong. So, you know, ultimately we're here for the students, and you know, I was interested at the beginning on what they wanted to, you know, what they had to say on this, and you know, I think it's been pretty clear. The other thing that it was talked about in some of the comments, but nobody's mentioned yet tonight, is there was quite a few comments on the fact that our job is to prepare kids for life after school in the world. And in the larger context, the world is competitive. There are awards, there is recognition, you know, this stuff, whether we like it or not, this stuff all exists, you know, in the world that we're sending these kids off to. So, you know, part of what we're doing here is to prepare them for life after they leave us. So, you know, from reading the comments, from looking at the scores, it seems pretty clear to me that the vast majority of the people surveyed don't have a problem or a large problem with what's going on. You know, I agree that we can always strive to do better, and you know, we can tweak things, and I think that's been going on over the last couple of years. And I agree with Mark that, you know, there's different ways to you know, recognize different forms of students, and you know, I'm open to that as well. But as far as drastically changing what we have been doing, you know, based on what I'm seeing, I can't support that.
Kevin, you want a shot?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I thought so my interpretation of the survey, I saw a lot of common ground. And I wonder if awards form a proxy. They're a tradition. Right? I think many of us have had a similar K through 12 experience. And so the reasons I saw for keeping them, and even the reasons for not dropping them, involve recognizing, celebrating achievement, accomplishment, perseverance, and things like this. And so I think it's possible that award holds that place in our traditions. And when we think about, well, how do we recognize accomplishment, perseverance, and achievement? We think awards. And if there's the perception that it's an all or nothing, that, well, we're either going to keep awards, which represent recognizing and celebrating, or we're going to get rid of them, and getting rid of something that recognizes and celebrates. So that sounds poor. That, you know, I think what I got from the survey was that people want to recognize and celebrate student achievement and accomplishment. And that can be done in a variety of ways, right? Perhaps awards are doing that currently, certainly for some students. None of this is ever going to be 100% right. And any conversation will be able to find exceptions. But it sounds like there are certainly possibilities that maintain these values. So the example that Noah gives, one of many models, recognizes and celebrates achievements and accomplishments. And I wonder about the student agency in this. I was thinking about the student success plans that are new. And part of this is about student agency as well. What would success mean to you? Where do you want to go as a school? How can we help support you? And something, you know, whether the compromise is adding it on or replacing it, I think is not here or there. I don't want to try to convince anybody of anything right now. But I could imagine student success plans being tied to some sort of, I forget the term.
Student showcase of success.
Student showcase of success. So their plan gets sort of realized in small increments as they self-evaluate. And so that's something I see. I see that everyone talking wants to recognize and celebrate achievements and accomplishments, and that there are traditions in place. And in a dialogue sort of way versus a debate, which I think could easily happen, I think it's challenging to hold multiple things together. There are students that have profound moments of recognition through awards and others that don't. We may be fond of things just because we do them, right? Maybe the research does or does not support this or that. It does sound like, as Jake pointed out, and I asked the administrators, there has been work already. There's been some concerns, some modifications are made. And I think that kind of fits into the conversations around equity and the equity leadership team, is that that's going to be an ongoing process, that whatever we do, whether it was a large change or a series of small change, we'll have to continue to revisit these things. Because just because we did it, that's not necessarily a good argument for doing it. And I also want students to be aware of the world as it is right now, but also to be able to imagine a world that could be different. I don't think the world is inevitable. I do think they should be prepared for what might be expected of them, but not that it's inevitable and it's unchangeable. And I think there's value, and I'm not saying that this is what we need to do or we fail. Rather, there's value in showing students alternatives to what is. It wasn't surprising to me that so many students and parents were in favor of awards. We're in favor of lots of things that we've done. I'm in favor of Christmas. I'm an atheist. So when I celebrate Christmas, I'm not celebrating anything that I like, cutting down a tree and giving gifts to my kids. It's an uncritical celebration. So I'm in favor of it. So if you ask me, do you want to get rid of Christmas? No, I don't really want to get rid of Christmas. I'm not deeply, it's part of a tradition. So, and not saying that to mean, oh, that's why we should change it. But sometimes we will have to evaluate things that most of us like, especially from an equity perspective. There are probably lots of practices. The word grades have come up several times. There is lots of very interesting research about grades. I mean, we don't put error bars in our grades, which makes me suspicious of them as numerical evaluations of something. So the grades, I try ungrading in some of my classes, and I'm a fervent supporter of it, and it is deeply uncomfortable. And I have students that are excited about it and deeply uncomfortable. And in all the faculty circles that I work in, we discuss things like ungraded, who are in favor of it, we're deeply uncomfortable with it. And so I think whichever way this goes, we're probably going to be uncomfortable. I don't think change is often comfortable. Let's see, I'm just going to review my notes briefly. So, I mean, I do like the idea, Brian, of kind of stretching the conversation. And in particular, of trying. I think it's hard not to, because I'm sure we can feel out our ideological positions. But to listen to where people are coming from, including the survey data, and try to get a sense of, well, what are we hoping they do? What are we worried that they don't do? Before we try convincing. I maintain some concern about equity. And it's just a question. I don't have a bucket of literature, but I'm concerned about, what was the word I heard Noah use earlier? It was excelling, all right? What does it mean to excel? I mean, a competition could be a way, certainly somebody who wins a sports event or a musical event or gets a 4.0, that is definitely a form of excelling and excellence. But what about a housing insecure student that maintains a solid B? You can make the argument that's more impressive. I mean, there's a problem with comparing these things. But what does it mean to do amazing things? What does it mean? And it's so easy to polarize this conversation and create dichotomies. But there's something to be said about us as the adults always trying to think of the things that we should award children for. Right? And a lot of the comments in the survey mention adding some. Let's add some. Well, sure. But again, that's us. It's the whatever your age was. I'm 44. You know, it's us sitting around thinking, well, we could award people for this, and we could award people for that. And so definitely at some point of this, students could co-construct these versus us deciding what awards are good and who should get them. Which, yeah, there's something to that. But there's also something for determining whether or not you've done a good job yourself, which we do, I think, quite often. So those are meanderings. They're not meant to be convincing, but maybe hold space. My mouth is dry. So yield the floor.
I would just add that I think that, you know, reviewing the feedback that we received was really, I think, important for us to use to consider potential further discussion and adjustments that we might want to consider. You know, I made notes that I want to, you know, review with the admin to see if those things stood out to them as well. And, you know, I think that some of this is, you know, by nature, difficult to set criteria for, right? Like student of the month is really, it can recognize a whole host of kind of behaviors, attributes, qualities that teachers are seeing in students. And it's typically not the academic achievement award. It's typically the perseverance, the resilience, the kindness, you know, the core values that Richard mentioned. And so those by nature are not, you know, objective. They're very subjective. And so I think, though, being transparent about what are the qualities that these are based upon, you know, these are the core values that student of the month is based upon. I'm not sure that that's overly clear to families, that they know that. So I think communication is something that's important, but also, I mean, the conversation about nominations and bias and really looking together at the data, looking at the patterns, looking at it from an equity lens, looking at it from, you know, different ways to see if, you know, we can identify any biases that are, you know, perhaps unknown or we're unaware of at this time through nominations. And I think the work that's happened through, you know, kind of the quarterly ceremonies and some of the other adjustments that have been made have been positive. But I think some of our big end of year practices still need a similar examination, because I think we're still doing some things there that we've taken away in other places. So I think that's an area where we need to really look at how we're doing those award ceremonies. But I also agree with what Brian said. I mean, it's just really compelling to look at this information, and I guess it did surprise me in some ways that students were so clearly, the students who responded to the survey, which I think is a really strong sampling of students, you know, very heavily weighed toward, you know, valuing awards. So I guess, you know, my hope is that we continue to assess, adjust, analyze the practices, and consider, you know, feedback that we hear about how to make improvements along the way. And, you know, I think that's where I see this going, rather than in a board forum, taking it back and letting the schools take it from here with the processes that have been ongoing, but with now even more information to consider at the school level.
Yeah, that, I mean, that feels to me like a comfortable consensus. I'm blank, the NEASC, it's the student, what's the goal of the NEASC that we're working on, defining the student?
Oh, portrait of a graduate.
Portrait of a graduate. I was thinking archetypal student, but I knew that wasn't right. So, yeah, it feels to me like, you know, we've gotten a lot of feedback, a lot of good conversation, a lot of diverse perspectives. I personally would be very comfortable going forward. You know, I don't think we can spend repeated time on this at the board level. There's just so many other issues, and you know, we're about to hit budget season where our capacity is very limited. But I personally would be very comfortable, you know, leaving the administration to kind of pick up and continue this conversation, not to mention the conversations they've been initiating. And I do think it ties into some other initiatives that are going on. It ties into our DEI work. It ties into our portrait of a graduate, ties into our student success plans. I think there are a lot of initiatives that are going to keep the momentum going without having to necessarily bring the board spotlight to it all the time. So that's kind of my proposal going forward, is we've got a lot of ideas on the table, a lot of feedback from our community, a lot of discussion already happening in the schools, and I'd like to let it just work forward for a bit through the administration and the principals and the teachers, and through some of these initiatives that I think are going to keep it driving forward, regardless of specific focus on awards, and just let things stew for you know, 6 months, a year, and let's see where, you know, report back 6 months or a year from now and see what's happened, kind of have an update. But that's what I would like to propose going forward. Does anybody have a strong objection to that? Or anybody want to take a particular vote?
I'm certainly supportive of going on in the direction that you propose and that Meredith proposed. I guess the one thing I'd want to add to that is that I certainly don't want to see this something where the board is taking the driver's seat by any means, but I would like kind of periodic reports back on what's actually going on, whether that comes in a superintendent report or that comes in you know, principal reports. I don't really care how it comes, just I would like periodically kind of a heads up on the work that's being done, the directions that are being kind of investigated, and certainly you know, before any major changes were implemented. At that point, I think I probably would want some more formal role for the board.
I'd like to echo that. I do appreciate the framing that you provide, Brian, that we don't want to set a precedent for a group of 5 people to just, you know, run the show, and there are dozens of people with lots of training and experience. And I guess the balance I'm still finding as the newbie is, you know, there is like an elected capacity. I know I was unopposed, so, you know, I'm elected by the lack of opposition. But like there's that sense there was a non-zero portion of people that were either ambivalent or leaning towards not. And so we, you know, with Mark saying, I certainly be curious as to what continues to go on, and, you know, at least small opportunities to trouble the ideas that there can be objective criterion, or that grades could be objective criterion. So I would disagree. So little ways to at least throw something in there, especially if constituents are concerned. I mean, constituents have been concerned, and they may be the minority. And I'm never sure exactly what to do with that. I mean, it's easy for me to agree with the majority when they agree with me. It's harder not. So, you know, something where we're not just letting it go for 6 to 12 months. because I do think it's important. Yeah, to check in.
I think principals could add it to their reports as another area that they just have on their principal report. And they can let you know if there have been any updates or new developments at their school relative to awards of it. You know, we could do this for the next year.
Great. Okay,
I guess I just, on student of the month and student of the year, it seems like that's one where it'd be nice to really focus on examining how we do that, and if there's any thought of not doing that or doing something instead. And I guess I do, one question I have is like, why is the name up on the marquee for the student of the month? It seems like a practice to me that is always struck me as.
I'm not sure how that started. I don't know if the
I don't-
town just picks it up or if it's,
Yeah,
they-
I just like when I
from-
first
they pick
walked
it up
in-
from our communications and,
Yeah.
put it up there as a way to celebrate what's happening in the school. So I think it's just meant to support what's happening in the schools.
Yeah, I guess that was my first, like when I first walked through Orno and saw that, I definitely had a reaction to that. And I guess I wonder, revisiting that as a particular thing.
yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm moderately pro award, but it's one thing to get recognized in front of your peers that it's another thing to see your name literally in the lights. Yeah, I probably would have the same reaction that you did on that. But like Meredith said, I don't think that's something, that's not even a school initiative, that's probably a town initiative. So,
Yeah, I mean, the town puts up our graduates in the spring. I think it's a nice thing they're trying to do. So,
Yeah, and I guess any, movement, towards making, it seems like there's been a movement to make a lot of these awards private as opposed to the public nature, and that seems like it solved some issues, so. Yeah, more thought on like.
I think the student of the month is one that's not been changed to private except by request. It's in the newsletter that goes home to families. But I think, we'll have dialogue about this. I think for the first time since I've been here, we've had a student say, I don't want my name publicized with this. And maybe it wasn't the first time since we've been here, but we had a student say, I don't want to be recognized at all. Please select someone else. And I don't know if that's a result of what we've been doing lately and people feeling self-conscious. I'm not sure.
so it seems like we have a path forward. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it seems like a reasonable path forward. I think, there's gonna be plenty of other things that are gonna come up with the board too, so I think that's a reasonable balance. Okay, next up, construction self-managed project priorities and next steps. You want to do that, Meredith? You want me to do that?
Sure, I'll start. And then you
Yeah,
can add on. So we've had progress in our work for our 4 self-managed projects. And I have a kind of a really busy sheet that I've provided you with lots of numbers. So I just wanted to kind of walk through what you see on the sheet. So we've been using a sheet like this to track. It's just a 1-pager. And it's in the, you can't see because of my background. It's a 1-pager that's in the materials on the website too. We've been using this to track where we were with our remaining bond funds and available capital improvement reserve funds relative to what we had left to pay for in our large construction project that Bowman was managing, and that we had a contract with Bowman around. And then the projects that we were holding off until we saw how much money was left at the end of the large project to try to do on our own. Because if you go back to when we were trying to scope the big project, the scope of the big project was larger initially. And we had to squeeze out parts that just didn't fit in, the money that we thought this project could cost. So we pulled out things like this library renovation and the central office revamp down in the steam room, and roof repairs, and the ASA kitchen reno, and the concession building, and other things like parking lots that we've already taken care of, but those were pulled out of the project at the time. So our goal was, once we finished the project, we could come back and look at, you know, what was left on the list that we had hoped to put in the larger project to see what we had room for. So as you recall, perhaps last summer, we did 2 major roof projects to begin with, working down our self-managed list. Now, that wasn't all the roofs that need to be done, but those were the 2 that we started with. There are more on the list that need to be done, but the first 2 were done. And then we had these 4 projects that we hoped to get done, that we had set aside money for, based on 3-year-old at this point estimates that were, you know, best case scenario estimates, I think, of what those projects could be done for 3 years ago.
And they were all pre-inflation.
Right.
explosion.
And that's what, you know, you see in that column, original budget estimate column. And so we've been working, as we've been, you know, continuing to wrap up the Bowman project, working to get designs done for the 4 self-managed projects that lead to cost estimates. So you can see that top set of cells under large project expenses remaining. We're down to about $115,000 left in the Bowman project overall. So that we're really narrowing in on the end of that project. I mean, that was a $13 million, or, you know, with change orders more than that now, dollar project. And so when we look at over on the left, what we have for revenue, you know, we begin to see a convergence of what we have left and what's left in the Bowman project equals, you know, what's left for other projects. So in the revenue, you can see right now, we have a $659,000 and some change left, balance in revenue left for from the bond funds, bond/ban, that's just all bond. We have a capital reserve, capital improvement reserve account balance of $628,000 and some change, and that's what the board has been adding to over the years from undesignated fund balance or end of year surplus, you know, funds that we put over there to help fund ongoing capital reserve needs. And then each budget year, we have a strategy of putting funds in our budget to help with capital improvement needs. So all of that right now adds up to that number you see in the green line. That's, you know, $1,352,000 and some change. Along the same kind of parallel consideration that I want to throw out there is the fact that before we even started the project, we created a 10-year capital improvement plan for all of the needs across the district that we knew were not going to fit into our large construction project, but needed to be on the radar, needed to be planned for. Because we have, you know, old buildings that are aging and need some refurbishment or repair. That 10-year plan was initiated year 1 in the summer of 2019, and then it was put on hold beginning summer of 2020 because of everything that has been happening with the construction project. Bill this fall has been reorganizing, reassembling that list, and it's grown, right? Because needs have grown and what we know about our schools has evolved. And that's what you see at the bottom of the sheet. It's not done yet. Right now, we would estimate that it's around a $3 million list of needs that I don't think is finished yet. I mean, I don't think it's over. I'm not even going to say what I don't think it's over, because I'm not sure. I think, you know, right now, if I had to say, what do you hope to have for the next 10 years to address capital improvement needs for the district, aside from self-managed projects, aside from our large Bowman project, I would say I would like to have 3 to 4 million. for us to be able to really feel like we're chipping away at our needs. And so that's something in the big picture that needs to be considered as we talk about these self-managed projects. So I'm just trying to paint a large picture of really what it's going to take to keep moving forward the way we should be with maintaining our capital improvement needs, or addressing our capital improvement needs. So circling back to the self-managed projects, and then we'll kind of put it all together for you. We got prices on the 4 projects. And they were in some places double and some places triple what, you know, we had originally hoped to be able to spend on this. You can see that in kind of the order they're listed here, the central office, reno of the steam room, an adult ed space, and records room is estimated to cost $845,000. The concessions restroom, storage, combo building is estimated to cost $558,000 and some change. The ASA old kitchen, and then there's also an adjacent storage room that we're going to reno into an instructional space. Those areas, that reno is estimated at $239,000 and some change. And then the OMS high school library reno, the room we're sitting in now, is estimated to cost really almost $780,000. In addition to that, we have one other item we've added to the list, and that's we're going to need about $50,000 more to do the ASA first and second grade wing HVAC project that we've set aside around $550,000 in ESSER funds to complete. And we're going to need more money to just finish out really that project at a very basic level. We've had to cut it back and to figure out what can we do for the money we have. We actually have a meeting coming up.
I was gonna say, I have a bad feeling that number is gonna
Yeah,
go up
we'll
after
see.
tomorrow.
Yeah, we have a meeting tomorrow. They've done more cost estimation, but we're going to need some money for that. So we're adding that into the mix. And so, you know, obviously when you add up all of those items plus the $115,000 we still owe to Bowman, if we were to do all of that, we would need 2.588, you know, and some change, and we have 1.352. So we don't have enough to do everything on our list here. And then we have this, you know, $3 to $4 million capital improvement needs for 10 years. So, you know, we need a larger strategy, right? How are we going to address these needs in the short term? And then how are we going to develop a strategy for the next 10 years? We talked with the building committee last week, asked them to come back, circle back to rank the 4 projects that we had previously ranked with the building committee, and shared all of this information with them. The ranking came out virtually, it was the same overall in terms of the order of priority, just slight changes in the actual, like, was it 1.6 or 1.7 before, but the ranking came out the same as it was, you know, back last May. We ranked these projects and brought that to you, and you all supported that prioritization. So you can see that they prioritized the central office project first, the ASA old kitchen reno second, the OMS HS library reno third, and the concession restroom storage building fourth. And I think the next step with Haley Ward, who is working on the project, is to try to get more precise price estimates than what they've provided to us so far. We're at the stage of design that cost estimation is more generalized, and they're planning to meet this week with someone who's going to do more precise cost estimation, and we'll know a little more about how we may be able to, Brian uses this term a lot, value engineer like the first 2 projects to hopefully make as much room as possible for the 3rd project. I think we've given up hope that the 4th project works within these numbers that we have right now. I haven't given up hope that that project is going to happen somehow you know, in the next, I don't know how many years, but I think it's a realistic possibility that we can find a way to do something with the third project, if not the whole third project. So I've talked a lot. I'd like to ask Brian or Bill what else we need to clarify. I didn't talk about the unassigned fund balance at all.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. I think you covered everything really well. It's a lot of information to absorb. But yeah, the one other piece out there is, you know, sitting in the bank account, the unassigned fund balance, and that number should be nowhere close to zero, shouldn't even be anywhere close to 500,000, because we need to have a cash reserve for, you know, unexpected contingencies, but you know, and Lynn's gonna disagree with me, and that's her job, but I suspect when push comes to shove, there could be a couple $100K to take out of there. Not a whole lot more than that, but
What'd you say?
couple $100K,
Okay.
200,000, for example. So yeah, I think that's it in terms of laying out the information. I mean, my own take on this is I think we need to proceed with projects ranked first and second, central office coming, you know, target them for this coming summer. Or maybe it doesn't, central office might not even have to be summer, but you know,
Neither
put
does
them in the
the-
queue to move forward with due haste. And yes, that's the business, the construction business euphemism of value engineer / cost would be the non-business construction business euphemism, but whether you know, value engineer the heck out of it / cost the heck out of it, really manage scope and costs on those first two projects. And you know, I'm optimistic that maybe by then we can pull in, we'll have our audit done, we'll have another year's audit done, we'll have much more, by the spring, we'll have much more updated of how this year's spending is going. Maybe with a couple 100,000 more pulled out and with some really strong cost cutting value engineering, we can see a way to getting that third project coming in stacked up next. And then longer term, you know, I think we need to start looking at other plans. Maybe there's longer term financing. I don't know, 10 years from now, the schools in the town want to put another bond out that could get that. But I also think we need to start looking at fundraising for the sports facility. That strikes me as something that it's going to be easier to, I'm not saying it easy, but easier to raise funds for than something like you know, renovating a storage room for conference space and special teaching needs. So I think we start to think about that around there, and then towards this capital improvement plan. I mean, to be honest, you know, 3 million is the cost today. You think about spending this over 10 years in inflation. I wouldn't feel like we're being serious about knocking this off without probably putting 350,000 in
A year.
a year. Yeah. That said, maybe it's not realistic. We knock it all. That to me is the target. You know, we inched up to a couple 200,000 a year towards the capital maintenance, not letting our buildings run down again. I think we need to look at that number going bigger. It's pretty hard for me to get too predictive about that until we get the, you know, ED 279 state funding and kind of see where our budget picture looks like a year from now. But so that's where I come down. Start number 1 and number 2, plus the SRF that we've already accepted to proceed on. Do some serious cost containment on those. Maybe think about low 6 figures coming out of the undesignated fund balance, plus the leftover from our very aggressive cost containment to get into the third project, which is the library. And you know, start getting real about the fact 200,000 is not enough to get a long-term program for keeping our buildings up to date. So that's kind of what I walk out of this is the big picture. But you know, that's why we're discussing this here, is to hear other. A lot of this will come back in a much more firm fashion in the budget scenario. We don't have to talk about taking out of undesignated funds right now. We don't have to talk about whether it's 200 or 250 or 300 or 350K a year that we're targeting. Those are clearly ultimately budget conversations with more information about the budgets in hand. I don't think we're not asking anybody to commit to going forward with project number 3, but I think maybe we're kind of looking towards some guidance from the board that 1 and 2 are correctly ranked, and at least proceed with more detailed designs and you know, not putting it out to bid yet, that would come back to the board, but proceeding towards putting it out to a bid, I think would be the proposal. Does that match your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we'll have, I think we'll have one more chance after we get this more refined cost estimation on all 4 projects to look at this together to say, okay, let's go on projects 1 and 2 and, hold on 3 and 4 and see where we can get with 1 and 2. Because the more detailed cost estimation will, I have to think it's going to refine things a bit more, because it does seem to me that their approach to doing cost estimation at this phase seems to paint everything with a really broad brush. I don't, when I say that to them, they don't agree, but they're using aggregate averages that they see over lots of projects. So I know it's based on, real information, but I think the next step will be really important for us to have that conversation about what the board wants to do at that point.
Any other thoughts, different priorities, different, none of this is a decision, but any thoughts about the big picture, long-term path forward?
So the ASA kitchen room, what is happening? What is the plan to make that into?
An instructional space primarily for music instruction. We need a really second music space where band floats here, there, everywhere. And then when band's not in there, we could use it for other purposes, different needs through the day. But it's just right now sitting with lots of kitchen equipment that's just been,
I
it's
was
just
in there today.
mothballed, really.
Actually, that's the first time I was in there. So
Yeah. And then there's a space next to it that's a good size space that used to house our cafeteria tables that we don't need to house in there anymore. That would really be a great space for another small instructional, space, which we need all of those we can get for the, lots of programming that's provided in small group settings. We need more spaces for that kind of need. So it's 2 spaces that get done. The drawback of the space is the only way to get to it is through the gym. So that's what's kind of, the downside of this space, but we don't have the luxury at ACE of not using all space available. They really need more space.
I'm certainly supportive of kind of moving forward with priority projects 1 and 2. For sure. I also would agree with Brian that, we ended up in this situation, at least in part, and I'm not saying this group of we, but, kind of collectively over the years, we ended up here, at least in part, because we did not do a good enough job in putting forward enough resources for building maintenance. So I think we need to be, I think we've gotten better. Recent versions of the board have gotten better at that. I would agree with Brian that 200,000 is probably not enough there. So I think we need to look at that pretty seriously. I guess the one thing that maybe differs a little bit from what's been said so far is I'm not completely willing to pull the plug on project number 4 yet. I think certainly fundraising and development is something that needs to be looked at there for sure, but I don't think it has to be a completely one or the other. I think it could be a situation where maybe there is some RSU resources, budget resources that go there along with kind of fundraising and development opportunities. And going a little bit further on that, I think that if we're going to say that, we need to figure out a way to get serious about actually doing it. I mean, one thing I've heard a lot in the however long I've been on the board now is, development and fundraising, and what I've actually seen is nothing. And that's not anybody's fault. It's just everybody's busy and there's too many things to get done. Not enough time to do them, there are enough resources. But if we're going to say that that's how we're going to fund that, or in part or in whole, then I think we need to actually follow through on that and get serious about that. But I'm not willing to completely pull the plug on that yet.
Yeah, I mean, just to be concrete, because I know people listen, I don't think anybody's saying pull the plug. It's just a question of when, how the funding happens and when the timing happens. Everybody would like to see it go forward in some fashion and some timing.
So I'm just going to repeat for understanding. Part of this conversation is preparing us for the eventual budget conversations when we're trying to think about how much to kind of set aside so that as time goes forward, we're not playing catch up. Right. Okay. Makes sense.
And the other part is to really lay groundwork for probably in a couple of months. We'll be bringing you more refined figures and asking you to support us moving forward into the next phase to ramp up to do some of these projects.
I mean, the good news, and I always like to point out the good news is we went into this, we said, okay, if we put out a $16.745 million bond, that's gonna give us enough to do what we scoped into the big project that Bowman had. And to do, we had this long list of self-managed projects, and it's gonna get us a good ways down, but not all the way through. We never planned it that it would get us all the way through the list of self-managed projects. And, you know, to a large degree, that's, so we came out of the Bowman with about 1.2 million, which is exactly what we were planning to come out with. So, you know, how often does that happen? You enter into a construction project that big and you come out with what you thought you were going to come out with. So I think that's kudos to Meredith and to Bill and to Brent before that, and to, you know, a lot of people. But so that's the good news. The single biggest piece of bad news is construction has inflated by 50% just in the last 2 years. And I also think some of the projects we pushed off into self-managed to say, oh, we can do that a lot cheaper than Bowman and CHA can do it, turned out to be true. Some of the parking lots, the siding at ASA, we did for a quarter of what they estimated it at. But some of these other projects, they were underestimating, and we came in, you know, we cut their numbers. So I think we were just over optimistic. So, you know, big picture, congratulations to everybody. The big project came in on cost. Not exactly on time, but closer on time than I ever thought, especially given the COVID interruptions, and I ever thought we had a right to expect. And now we're working through with the leftover money they always plan to have on what the priorities are. The bad news is we probably underestimated some of those costs, and all of them have inflated drastically. So we never claimed we were going to get all the way through the list of self-managed projects, but we may or may not be having to push it a little bit higher up that list where the cutoff point is.
And in my mind, whatever we can't do now with these bond funds and whatever strategy we use to fund what we're doing now, anything that remains goes on the capital improvement needs list, right? So it's still a need. It's not that, you know, this is not going to be a need if we don't get to this, and the concession building is not a need if we don't get to it. It's a need. It has to go on the list, and we have to figure out, you know, how we're going to fill that need along with, you know, the rest of them.
So I was going to bring this up under a MESBA update, but maybe it's appropriate, or MSMA update, but maybe it's appropriate to bring up here. So for the refresher for the new board members, state funding traditionally comes in two pots. There's what's called SREF. That goes only to critical or high priority projects, life safety, electrical, HVAC, fire safety, school safety, you know, door lockdown kinds of things. And it's capped at $1 million per school over 5 years. We have maxed out that cap at both ASA and the high school. We were choosing not to pursue SREF funding at the middle school because we want to qualify for the second pot of money, which is what they call major construction. Typically, that's new schools, $40 million. Sometimes in principle, it can be used for renovating an existing school. But there's a growing push to ask the state to put a middle pot of money. You know, I don't know what the size is, $5 or $10 million. I would hate to not call that, not call that small construction, but it's not the current major construction, which is really 40 million, 100 million.
It's more like 80 to 100
Yeah.
per project.
So really advocating apparently I learned at the MSMA conference, the state school board, which interacts, they supervise the DOE, has the power of how this money is allocated. So I got the name and the contact. I was planning to advocate. I know the superintendents have been doing this too, but I think it's time for school boards to start doing this as well, advocating that they create a middle pot of money. You know, if we could get 10 million from the state at the middle school, I'm not saying I would do the whole thing. It probably wouldn't do everything we want to do at the middle school, but boy, it would sure go a long way. You know, the other potential is funding locally, right, where the taxpayers pay it, and that's where the large part of this last project came from. And I don't think we can go back to that well anytime soon. It passed 60-40, which is a much lower threshold than our budgets, which are typically 80-90%. I think if we go back for a bond anytime soon, it's asking for trouble. So I don't think, on the other hand, if we got 10 million from the state and we went back and asked for just 2 million or 4 million, that might be a feasible. All of which is to say, I guess I'm interested if the rest of the board would like to co-sign a letter with me to the State Board of Education, asking them for a mid-sized construction program. So that's something other people think makes sense.
I would absolutely sign.
Okay.
I'm interested, and I think we've talked a little bit about this before, this delicate balance of letting the middle school get run down enough to qualify for more, so that it's really, really good and not just kind of patched up, right? Is that, am I remembering correctly?
Well, the challenge is SRF has no existing building quality standard. It's just, you have a, demonstrated need, these life safety issues, but the major construction problem is it's a lottery ticket. They only give out 5 to 8. They only do it like every 4 or 5 years. And they only give out 5 to 8 across the whole state. And they're given to the buildings that are ranked worst in the state. Right. Which is a terrible incentive system. Right. This is what we faced. It's like, do we ask the taxpayers to pay money to upgrade things so we don't qualify for major construction? Or we do let our buildings fall apart even more than they are now, because we brought the architects in and said, how close are we to qualifying? And they're like, well, the middle school is pretty close. Actually, you have a good chance of ranking in the bottom 8 schools in the state for the middle school, but you have no chance with your other buildings. You'd have to let them go for another 20 years. And we're like, we can't do that. So, in the
And
middle
it's really
school.
just the age of the middle school.
Yeah, I was
that
gonna
is
say, it's not because the
problem.
middle school is falling apart. It is absolutely not because the middle school is unsafe. It's simply because it's a 1920s building. Yeah, and 1928, I think, was the original construction. It was a horseshoe around, what's the gym now? The gym, I think, came in the 30s. So yeah, I don't want any rumors starting that it's unsafe or it's falling apart or any of that kind of stuff. But just simply by its age, it would be able to compete. And so, yeah, but that's the challenge. We started doing SREFs and putting in ADA, all these things we'd like to do at the middle school. It's not going to look as competitive. So it's a really perverse incentive system that we face right now. But that's the thought process. Architects said these schools aren't close. We're like, the only way we're ever going to get funding is taxpayers. We did a big bond. Middle school, they said you're pretty close to actually qualifying. Of course, it's been 4 years now and that program is not run again. But when it does run, it's a lottery ticket. And probably there's going to be a big push to move the middle school to somewhere out of town, which I would absolutely refuse to do. They're much happier about building a new school for 80 million than spending 30 million to renovate a building. But technically we can, if we get community consensus to renovate the building, we can do that. So that's the larger context.
Thank you.
But anyway, yes, I personally think this 5 to 20 million range would be a really helpful program. Right, and we go 4 times as far or 8 times as far as the 80 to 100 million awards. And it would avoid schools racing to the bottom. So yeah, all right. So I'm going to draft a letter. I'll bring it to a meeting so it's all above board in the public to sign it. If anybody wants to go sign that with me. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on construction? Don't believe we had any co-curricular nominations. I didn't see them in the packet.
No, next meeting there will be that.
Okay. Subcommittee reports. Well, as long as I started the MSMA NISBA report, you guys all sent me forward as a delegate. We reviewed the resolutions. Pretty much the whole slate passed without significant discussion or debate, with 2 exceptions. So you recall there was the testing. We had a big discussion here about social studies that did not come up anywhere else, and I didn't feel like I had a clear mandate from here with a split mandate, so I didn't bring up the social studies. What did come up was the school boards wanted to add a criteria that the state keep a test in place for at least 5 years so we can get longitudinal data. There's been a history of the test changing every 1 or 2 years. So I supported that. I was pretty sympathetic with that, but that then did pass. The other one that got a lot of discussion was public participation in the school board meeting, at which I learned that I had presented that wrong. Apparently the law changed in 2020 actually said any member of the public, which is not restricted to, citizens of Orono and our stakeholders and the staff and the students and parents and guardians. But any member of the public can currently speak. So that's the state law. Our policy is actually in conflict with that. So law trumps policy. So that's basically the law at this point. So what the MESPA resolution was doing was advocating that the legislature tighten up that law and restrict it to the stakeholders at the board meeting. It was a deeply divisive debate. We had people from, I won't name district, but some districts that were like, we have people who don't even live here who show up and waste an hour of every school board meeting telling us to do stupid things that we're not even thinking about doing and will never do. And it's a huge waste of our time. We have to restrict it to our own stakeholders. And then there were other people who were like, I believe in free speech. I want, So anyway, long and the short of it is it got about a 62% yes vote, but it would have required 2/3, so that did not pass. So there is no position from MESBA on public. There's no position opposing the current law, which is that it's open to the general public. That's what came out of the MESBA delegate meeting. Meredith and I went to a bunch of good sessions. I don't know that I have much specifically to report. I went to a good session on social media that I thought were some good resources. So maybe we get down the road if we want to. They're part of a multi-team, but I thought they had a really good perspective. So anyway, some good resources to see. Yeah, anything you would report out of the sessions?
No, I mean, there's usually, we pick up some information about state assessment. That was really important. We'll hear more about that actually at our next our board meeting when we have the data workshop. Good information, really just from attorneys about what's happening and, landmines that we want to steer clear of. That's often a feature of these conferences that are valuable to us. So, just generally, it was really just more valuable to be in person this year. It was,
Yeah.
just like our students, it's more valuable to go to these professional developments in person. So that was really helpful too. It allowed us to connect with some vendors and such also that we wanted to connect with.
Oh, the only other thing I would update, I agree, the assessment update was important. The session with the commissioner of the DOE, there's sort of a cliff that's been built into the ED 279 funding formula where they, just because of COVID, a lot of schools saw rapid declines in enrollment during COVID, and they didn't want schools to have to contract, temporarily out of that. And so there was a lot of worry about this cliff and the COVID, the ED 279 funding formula. And the long and the short of it is the commissioner thinks she has a plan that's going to prevent that cliff from happening, which essentially incrementally compared to last year will look like no change, but it amounts to a net increase in funding. So that's reasonably good news. We'll have to see how the election goes, but I'm moderately optimistic about funding going forward. So, yeah. Okay, subcommittee reports. Policy subcommittees this Thursday. The agenda has been circulated. We haven't met since the last board meetings. No other update. UTC.
We meet on Thursday.
Okay. Spruce.
We meet on Thursday the 10th.
Busy Thursdays. Curriculum subcommittee. I think we had a report since the last meeting. We'll be meeting a week from Thursday. Facilities building, as you just heard, what came out of the building committee.
Field, should we?
Oh, the field update. You may have noticed there are bulldozers and front end loaders and things up at the field. So, we had mentioned that Bowman / their subcontractor, Von Thibodeau, had kind of owned the fact that the soil they put down was not up to spec and had a plan, but they kept not updating us on when they were coming. A lot of that was because they were doing the required levels of testing behind the scenes to make sure they were meeting spec. They're clearly not going to not meet spec this time. They took the top 6 inches off, which is known as the root zone. We found a spectacular number of rocks, which we suspected. So not only did it have not the right amount of sand and things for growing grass and draining, but it did have a spectacular number of rocks. I saw a few rocks that were as big as my head, many rocks as big as my foot, and they were supposed to have nothing bigger than a half inch. So I have, you know, on one level, I appreciate that they're stepping up. On another level, they very clearly did not meet the specs the first time around. So now the bigger issue is the 2 feet below that, known as the subgrade, which continues to have really big rocks, and they're not supposed to have anything bigger than 2 inches. So we're going back and forth and probably trying to find the right compromise for that. But good news is, you know, we got the field issue cleaned up. They are still optimistic they're going to get the sod down in time this winter, and it's, you know, in a perfect world, it will just all be ready and green up and ready to go in the spring. So anything you would change to that?
No.
We're still negotiating about how far down the subgrade and how big the rocks, but the top has been substantially improved, and we've already got them to go down into the subgrade some. So substantial improvement and a complete fix to the drainage growth issue. And it's going to get done this fall, so we don't lose any more sports seasons to it. Wellness committee? No, you mentioned that.
Yeah, we actually met today. This long day of meetings. Let's see, we did sort of we talked a little bit about the outdoor stuff that we've been doing on the side, but basically, you know, there's a couple spaces we've been looking at for doing outdoor ed, and there's one space across near ASA over there that just looking at making it a classroom and thinking about different options, and so we just talked a little bit about that. Most of the time we talked about food and food service challenges, and I learned a lot about where things are at and the challenges. And I guess, you know, we talked about how, I mean, pre-pandemic, like at least in ASA, we had salad bars and had like a plan for doing a lot of scratch cooking and things like that. And now we're in this like severely understaffed and can't keep up, and my understanding is that we're not where we were headed, and there's no real problem with trying to figure out how we could get back on that path, and it's not clear. And we talked about that. We talked a little bit also about challenges of coordination between the different schools in terms of like still on food, but like whether we have sugary snacks that aren't up to spec distributed by various people within the schools, or whether that's not allowed, and different policies across the schools. So yeah, that's sort of a long conversation about that, and clear way forward, but it's definitely eye-opening for me, sort of the challenges faced.
Yeah, in particular, hiring in food services, right? We're not alone. The restaurants are having a hard time too.
Yeah. That's good too. So I know a little bit about that, but yeah, no, but it's certainly staffing shortage, and I mean, honestly, like the the capacity to compete against the private sector with the pay that's currently being offered is not great. So, and the challenge, you know, I took a tour through that old kitchen space, and we looked at the old. I guess we got a salad bar grant thing funded and it's sitting there, and there's no way to use it where we are now. It's sort of very sad to me to see it sitting there and like us not have a space that we can use it in or have the capacity to use it. And yeah, it was just really sad to see that. So I don't know way forward is, but yeah.
DEI leadership team met since the last board meeting. It's kind of at a stage of setting itself up as more of a steering committee and going into subcommittees to do the work and bringing in some more people, various stakeholder backgrounds into the subcommittees to do the work. Created 5 committees. And the overarching DEI leadership team will meet at the end of January. I don't know, do you want to go into the 5 committees, or is that enough of them?
I could just mention, I don't know if they were in Susan's report or not, actually. I can't remember. Committee on working on professional development and building cultural competence in the school community at large. A subcommittee on communications, a subcommittee on studying, collecting data, that rigorous examination of our culture. A subcommittee on SSPs, the student success plans, and a subcommittee on something that I'm having trouble.
Welcoming
Oh,
families.
the family and welcoming, student family welcoming committee. Those are the 5 areas where we've started the work. There's more to be done, but we've chosen those 5 as the focus to begin with.
Okay, any other business? Any future agenda items? The floor is open for a second public comment. Would anybody like to comment? Seeing no public comment, our next board meeting, we have 2 separate sessions. We have a data workshop from 5 to 6:30 on November 15th. And then we have a regular board meeting, a slightly delayed start time at 6:30 PM on Thursday, November 15th. Any requests for information or follow-up? Okay, and then we have board professional development. So the only things left are we're gonna do some, we're just gonna walk through some guidelines for strong boards and talk about them as a board. Anybody who wants to watch that is welcome to, but I certainly don't expect people to. It could easily be as exciting as watching paint dry, so, and I know administrators have early mornings, so I don't expect anybody to hang around for that. We're just gonna vote to adjourn after that. So to the board, yeah, we've had this, I think, on the schedule once or twice before, but we are moving into this portion. Yeah. We have request for a bio break. Yeah, let's take a 3-minute bio break. And I apologize. I knew this was going to be a long meeting, but Meredith and I gamed it out. And I think the other meetings are longer. So last spring, so I think we've had to postpone a couple times. We should do it.
Just
Okay, I'll bring it back.
15 at 5. Yeah, it's from us, we'll show up at 5 and the board will just go longer because we're starting at 6:30.
a little bit more time watching reels when I'm just relaxing in the day. You know, I'm just tired and I'm spending 15 and then 20 and then 25. I'm like, whoa. And I love a good paperback on a sunny day. But there is, I can definitely feel the engineer, like they're feeding me the kind of stuff I like. I like something, I watch it twice.
Yeah.
I get another one of them. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just short enough I don't have to think at all. That's problematic. And I worry if this can happen to somebody who really likes to crochet and read books and fold paper. If you grew up on this, and how could any of these things compete with the little rewards my brain is getting from these TikToks and reels and stuff?
They spend a lot of money to do that to you.
They do. And
So-
there's some good content, but there's a lot of like, what is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. So just to refresh people, we had walked through sometime in the spring, I forget, May or June, through this middle part, the code of ethics for board members. Right, and we didn't have any, we just, read an item off and talked about what that meant to different board members but we had noticed this section over on the right-hand side and it said, we all agreed at the time that it was a worthwhile exercise. I don't know if we all agreed knew we'd be doing that at 9 o'clock at night, but at the time we agreed to, we sort of committed to doing it. We tried to bring it back twice and we've had board members with emergencies. So here it is tonight. Like I say, Meredith and I talked about it and I don't think there's any time before January where it gets better. So we can kind of do this as the board wants to. I highlighted, didn't come out in super strong yellow, but I highlighted the ones that I don't think we want to walk through every one of these things, but I highlighted the ones that I thought might be most constructive. But if somebody obviously wants to jump to a different topic, we can do that. So, and then I put in one down at the bottom that I found just from Googling a lot of board best practices. So that one's just an addition that doesn't come from me, but I did add it to this particular listing. So what impact will this decision have on students? I think for me, I 1000% take the good faith of everybody who's sitting here in this room that we're here for the students. I have seen board members who are here for their egos or personal agendas or tax cutting or other things, but with this particular group, I 1000% take the goodwill about what's good for students. And then of course, the challenge is how do you operationalize that? And for me, the challenge is making sure I'm thinking about, we have about 800 students in our district. Challenge is making sure I'm thinking about all 800 students. It's really easy for me to think, not just about my students. Again, I've known board members who spend a lot of time pushing for their own students. And I don't see that in this board, but the students I know best are my students and their friends. And okay, that gets me up to 20 to 30 students. That's what, 2.5% of the student population, but it's a very biased sample of the student population. And there are things that I can ask them and I feel like I get a pretty representative answer, and there's other things I don't. So that's the question, is how can I think about the 800 students and not the 2.5% of the students that walk through the threshold in my house? We have students with IEP and 504 plans, and that ranges everywhere from students who are nonverbal to students who can't sit still for 3 minutes, to students who are straight A students but have dyslexia or something like that, right? So that's a really big bucket by itself, but it's important to think about that whole bucket of students, right? We have students who go to UTC and are gone from the high school for half the day. We have students, it's a sad thing, but the McKenzie-Vento Act requires districts to deal with students that are homeless, and we have those in our district. We have students that are known to staff to come from families that have drug addiction, insufficient money to make it through we have students whose primary calories are coming from what they get in the schools. And we have students with a really diverse set of learning goals and needs. We have students who are not planning to go to college, who think homework in high school is a waste of time, and for the most part don't do homework in high school. Which means in our current system means they're getting C's and B's through high school. We have students, we have the whole range of students. So And in particular, in this district, we are uniquely pretty bimodal. We have 20 or 30% of students who are really struggling, 20 or 30% of students who are really high flying and probably under challenged in this district. And we don't have that big peak in the middle. It's a lot easier to teach when you have a big peak in the middle and small tails at the ends. And we have the opposite. So I don't have any answers, but when I sit here, it's not the question of, do I think about how this impacts students? It's how do I find out how this impacts all of our different kinds of students? That's, and I don't have a great answer, but that's the challenge. And for me, that's what this particular criteria means. Other people have thoughts?
I think the only thing I'd add to that, I agree with everything you said. The only thing I would add is that there's certain students who have parents that are very good at advocating for them. And then, you know, you have this whole group of students whose parents really couldn't care less and don't advocate for them. And I try to consider that group because we're the only ones who will advocate for them.
Yeah. And in particular, just to expand on that, public comment is not necessarily representative of the community or of the 800 students. It's an extreme, it's just like the 2.5% that come into my house. Yeah. Other thoughts about the student one?
I think it's also probably important there to rely on people that we interact with who do interact more with students than we do, right? So and that's where it's important, where we can get feedback from teachers and coaches and building administrators, which I think we do a pretty good job of. So I would just throw that in.
Yeah, it connects well with Jake's point, which is, yeah, there are, it's easy. I mean, presumably all of us would, you know, cause a fuss if we thought something was wrong with our children's education, because we have the time and the means and the confidence to do so, and the interest. And it's a good reminder that we can request information from those people in the schools who maybe have more contact with those students to get a better sense of how policies we're considering or being asked to consider might affect those populations, or that we're not going to hear from regardless of what happens.
How does this decision help us reach our district goals? To me, that just means, are we being strategic, right? We have pretty intentionally, this didn't happen 10 years ago, but we have pretty intentionally set a process of putting together 5 goals every June, and then trying to make sure anything the board looks at, a bunch of other people have to spend time and energy thinking about and looking at. So I try and recognize it's not just about board capacity. Oftentimes it's less about board capacity and more about administrative and teacher capacity, but being strategic, right? We set our goals, and then do we kind of stick to our goals and focus on what's moving us towards the goals that we set for the year? And, you know, those are overarching goals. I also think about our 3 student growth and achievement. They're not annual goals. They're sort of the overarching goals of, you know, are we meeting each student where they're at and moving them forward? Are we addressing the whole student? Are we creating a growth mindset? So, yeah, I just read this one as it's easy as a board member to go down the rabbit hole of the details and devote a lot of attention to a topic, but are we being strategic and spending our time? Well, that's a question that's going to come up. Do we spend our time on what matters most? So, any thoughts on that?
I think you covered it.
Do data and research support this decision? And for me, that goes back to the first point. I don't know most of the 800 students, so I think it's important to use the data we have about our students. You know, and student growth and achievement is central, and so I think the data is not to say that we can't do a better job. My answer to everything is we should do a better job, but I think it should be an ongoing conversation about what data we should be collecting and what research we should be using. But I think it's important that data is a tool to reach that all 800 students.
I think we've improved over time the use of data pretty clearly. So I think we're definitely on the right track there, but again, keeping in mind that you can always do better.
Yeah, I mean, from a historical point of view, we were at a place in this district 10 years ago where testing occurred because it was required by the state, but nobody ever even looked at the test, which seems to me like a bigger waste than not taking the test. Teachers didn't use it in their classrooms. Administrators didn't use it, and the board wasn't using it. I think, the board needs to use it with a pretty light touch, right? We're not looking to evaluate teachers or anything with it, but just really big picture trends, right? Like, I think it's useful to know that math suffered more than reading through COVID. And I don't know how we would know that if it wasn't for testing, so. Did we spend our time on what matters most? To me, that's a big question. We could talk about anything, and we have 5 people who could, maybe Jake's a little quieter, but the four professors over here are trained professionally to talk for a long time about anything. And yeah, I think that's a central challenge, is to really focus, right? The board time and attention on our part, and on the fact that we only want to meet for a couple of hours twice a month, but also on the fact that every time we pay attention, the entire district pays attention to something. I think it's really important that we think this through about, are we spending our time and attention on what matters the most?
It's also inherently subjective though, right? Because what matters
Absolutely.
most is different for anybody who's being asked that question. So I mean, this is one I think it's important to consider. It's something we all need to think about as we go about filling this role. At the same time, I don't know that it's one that you can't answer it objectively, right? It's impossible to do that.
No, that's true. I mean, well, that takes me back to the goal setting, right? We have a consensus-based process to set some goals every year. It's maybe worth just checking in on the next one. Do all board members have an opportunity to be heard? And, that's a absolute touchstone for board functioning. As I've described, we don't necessarily do that through Robert's Rules of Order. We tend to be a lot more in the discussion and consensus phase than motion, discuss, closure, a vote. But tend to think it leads us to more discussion. But I just, to be honest, is probably feedback on me. Are people feeling like everybody's heard equally and having an opportunity to be heard? Or do people feel like there's an issue to discuss?
But I think it works better with small board, that we can operate that way.
Yeah.
There's only 5 of us.
Right, yeah, it could be a mess with the minus 100. Oh my gosh, don't even want to think about that.
Yeah, I think so. There's definitely like a learning. It is interesting to observe. I'm not always sure what to ask. I'll think this evening, when Mark said, I'm fine, leaving this with the administration, but I'd like to hear updates. So things like that are useful to see, so I can think, oh, that's something I can ask for. Wouldn't have thought to ask for that. There's definitely, I've never felt as though anyone said, shh. We've heard enough out of you, Kevin. That's definitely, I do feel like people wait until I finish. I can take 1 minute or 5 minutes, and I don't feel rushed. I've grown into that too. I wasn't sure at the beginning, but not because anyone trusted me, but just this is the first time I've been on a sort of formal, whatever this is, board thing.
I mean, I totally take your point about trying to figure out this board role. It's a really weird role. On one level, you have a lot of power, and another level, you don't have a lot of power, and most of your power is the bully pulpit or consensus. And it does have these ramifications. The union is on every board meeting writing up extremely detailed notes about who said what, and then teachers freak out over what gets said. Students freak out over what gets said, right? We've gotten some emails about students who freaked out over things that were said. I have 2 general guiding rules about, when I think about saying something at the board. First thing, there's a maximum coaching: praise them in public, criticize them in private. So I try and follow that pretty strongly at the board. It's not my job to criticize a teacher, but if I have a concern about a teacher or a situation, my first conversations with the superintendent, it's not something that I bring up in public. I really try and keep everything I say at the board framed in a positive direction. So praise them in public, criticize them in private, I think is a really important guideline for board members. The other one is a maxim that comes out of improv. Not that I do improv, I would be terrible at it. I would be probably the worst person at improv.
Growth mindset, Brian. Growth mindset.
Growth mindset. Yes, there we go. But I do know that what they teach you in improv is the key is to say yes and, right? You don't just shut down a line that somebody's developing when they're improving. You take that, you embrace that line, and you add something to it. And so to me, the board discussion, whether it's responding to a board member or responding to an administrator, I try and think about it as the yes and model. Right, it's like, yeah, I get that, I see that, that makes sense, and here's another thing that I'm thinking. So, you know, hearing you say that, Kevin, was really helpful. It is a really, it's a weird role that we don't get trained for. And those are the two things that I have learned, sometimes probably the hard way and by making mistakes, but you know, praise them in public, criticize them in private, and use the yes and model. It's really been two touchdowns for me on the board. Any other, I guess that's kind of been an expansive conversation, but other thoughts about that? I guess specifically, we were asking if people have an opportunity to be heard. Do we consider the expertise of staff and the data and the needs of our district? That's maybe redundant. Anything to add with that?
I think we already covered that.
And do we treat each other with respect? This is another key touchstone of functioning boards is people don't go home feeling like the board behaves worse than the kids in the classroom. That I've been on boards, I've been part of boards that were probably arguably behaving worse than kids in the classroom, but I've seen boards do that too, but I'm not perceiving it as a problem, but maybe I have a blind spot. People on the board feel like we're treating each other with respect. Disagree, yes, but with respect.
I think the key is, I've said this before, but compartmentalizing every decision that we make, right? Like, we may not agree on this part of the agenda, but then it's over, it's done with, hit the reset button and move to the next one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that comes in here, but I think that's the key too, right? One of the, it comes up, it was over under the code of ethics, right? Once the decision's taken, I will publicly support the decision of the board, right? I'm not going to spend my time rehashing decisions. And, you know, you're on here for a while, you win some, you lose some. And one day I agree with Jake and I disagree with Mark. And another day I agree with Mark and I disagree with Jake. And it's just really important that it's, okay, that was a decision. The wisdom of the board prevailed and I wasn't part of the wisdom of the board. Let's move on to the next topic and maybe I'll be part of the wisdom of the board. So it's really important to have that kind of move on and focus on the next topic. Do we welcome community or staff observers as valued guests? What do people think about that one?
Don't get any, at least in person.
No, it's no longer in person. It has changed.
I think we do. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have to offer 2 public comments. We do.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of go a little bit above and beyond what we need to do.
Yeah, I agree about the public comment. And I think we've worked pretty hard to make people clear that they're welcome in public comment. And in the function of public comment with staff, that certainly works. I guess I'd be curious to know if staff feel like their input. I hear staff, you know, I don't know how much control we have over this, but you hear staff frequently say things like, I don't know where this phrase came from. It clearly came from somebody because it's grammatically incorrect, yet it gets repeated. I'll be retributed against if I speak up in public. So that's out there in the staff. I don't know that we have control over that or are responsible for that, but I don't feel like, I don't know. On the other hand, it makes it very important to me that if staff know that they're always appreciated and welcomed, and their input is welcome too.
I think one of the things that I'm trying to make sure it's consistent is, you know, access to board meeting links, access to materials, access to minutes and videos. And, you know, that's an important part of, you know, having an open door and making it easily accessible. And I think we haven't always done that consistently. So that's, I think, a goal.
Yeah, I have noticed the agendas always go out a week early, and the board materials, there's always a link in the chat session. So I really appreciated that. I know that takes some work, and I appreciate that. You know, and on the teachers, there are plenty of teachers who feel comfortable coming to board meetings and telling us we're full of it, right? I mean, Mark and Jake remember the last time we didn't fill an English position. Don Joseph and Jim Boteil told us right to our faces we were stupid idiots, and and I don't think any of them ever felt like we held that against them. In fact, I continue to have a good, friendly, casual relationship with both of them. So I don't know where it comes from the teachers. I have, limited resources to fix it, but I think there's pretty good evidence that will speak to us directly instead of, gossiping behind our back and involving students. But if people speak to us directly, we're very open to feedback. Did we commit time to our own learning to support informed decision making? We have a thought on that.
This would be it, right? Or are we talking about specific issues?
I think it's more, well, it's all of it. It's professional development as a board, and it's also coming to meetings and, having done the homework.
I think it's pretty clear that the latter of those two is usually pretty well done on this board, and has been, for years. I think it's you can tell when someone comes unprepared to do something. You almost never see that here. I also think it's clear that it's relatively common for board members to come into a meeting having done, in some cases, pretty extensive outside research on a topic or multiple topics for a meeting. So I think we're fine there. I think the one thing that we've all talked about over the years, at least, those of us who've been on here for a while, is that maybe we don't do as good a job as we could for professional development, right? I think, Brian, you probably do the best of any of us at that. You take advantage of the opportunities that are presented every year. And then you're kind enough to not only go, but then come back and enlighten the rest of us. But I always have the greatest intentions of doing that, and I'm over my time on the board of going to those things. So I guess that's one area where at least I would acknowledge that I, as an individual board member, could do better is on the PD part.
I mean, I just put in the plug. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I was down there for 2 days, but people can go for an afternoon. Drummond and Woodsum has 2-hour and 4-hour workshops by Zoom. So there are opportunities short of, the all in 2 days in Augusta. So Meredith and I can continue to highlight those, but it can be a function of 2 to 4 hours. And there were a ton of, Meredith and I don't report on them because neither of us go to them, but there are a ton of, you're a new board member, this is the role of the board. You're a new board member, there's a parliamentary, there are a ton of training workshops at MESPA, but there are also Drummond and Woodsum training workshops, I think, every year too. So
Yeah, this is what, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say about, Kevin talked earlier about as a new board member, the learning curve, and took a while to get up to speed. And there's just, I think we could do so much better with that as, a district, but I'm not sure exactly, what the right answer is, because I think it's like drinking from the fire hose initially, and, so I'm not sure. I think we could set up a better system for onboarding board members and be more intentional about it outside of the first fire hose kind of training.
Yeah, and some of that's definitely not your fault. The fact that board members get elected as you're 3/4 of the way through a budget.
Right.
And
That's
if
really
you haven't been in a
timing.
budget kind of situation before, it's a little soul crushing. What was I saying? No, yeah, should I continue if the public supports my role in this? When the kids are a little older and my wife is more, not really recorded to mine. She doesn't watch it anyway. It's definitely a slow rollout of service. At this point, she's ambiguous or supportive, somewhere around there, of board participation. So I didn't want to
that's the
mention
best
like,
you can
oh,
hope for from a spouse.
Yeah, I was gonna
might
say.
might have been Friday at a conference in Augusta. You got the kids. Not even gonna ask. Maybe in a year or two, this part's normal. I can say, yeah, there's a conference in Augusta. I'm gonna go learn a bit. 1 year at a time. So I do find this stuff interesting, actually, is working with people to solve problems. But I was afraid I'd get hurt. Understandably.
The last one, there's different wordings. I think the wording I saw when I was at MSMA was the board sets the strategic direction and holds the superintendent accountable for operating to that strategic direction. So that's a succinct, I'm clearly getting very tired. Succinct statement of, the division of responsibilities between the board and the superintendent. I'll just start by saying it's really, really easy when you have a really good superintendent, which we do. But any thoughts about, this notion that we're strategic direction and accountability for strategic direction, and the operation belongs with the administration? I mean, I'll just say that's a touchstone. I think a lot about, I share this transparently. Meredith and I had a discussion. This is something the board should vote on. This is something the board should discuss and leave to the administration to implement. I think a lot about that, about how much of this is strategic direction and or financial business matters, which the board votes on, and or policies, which the board votes on, or, how much of this is operation of the schools, which it's really important that boards have the legal authority to take over everything in the schools. That doesn't mean we should. It doesn't mean it's good for the school. It doesn't mean it's good for the students. So it's actually important that we self-enforce that firewall of not stepping into that territory, because legally the courts could support us to do it. So, and I know some small town stories around here where boards have, decided to fire a teacher, have decided to lots of things. So I don't know. How do people feel like that, that division of labor of strategic direction versus operation is working in this district?
I think it's working fairly well. I think it's worked fairly well for a long time too. Yeah.
I certainly understand, again, as I said earlier today, the framing of what we can do versus what we should do. I'm mindful of the things I read in the news in other parts of the country where board meetings look like a WWF match. And so, while I certainly have my own ideological agenda, I'm mindful of other people who have their own, and I can see that balance of holding your horses so that there's a precedent that even if you have a strong position on something, you don't try to railroad it through, because that works for me today, but then it doesn't work for me tomorrow when some other person comes through and railroads their idea. But I think that is in the ballpark of what you're asking.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I talk about this quite a bit, and I think we talk about it less than we talked about it in the
Yeah.
first couple of years I was here. So I feel like it's become more like a more natural fit because I've just been here a while, and we maybe have more of a rhythm for that. So I think it's helpful when you have consistent leadership on both sides, to have that in good balance. And I think when the board had so much change in the superintendent leadership, that was a hard time for the board, and probably felt like, there was more oversight that the board felt like needed to happen during those years.
Yeah, I mean, we literally had one 2-week period where we had no superintendent. The last one, and left and went on vacation. You were coming in 2 weeks, and we had a couple of pretty big things, teacher firing and some other things go down. So yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the sad truth is that the average tenure of a principal is 5 years, average tenure of a superintendent is 3 years, and I don't know what it is for a board member, but I bet it's not more than 2 or 3 years. And yet, the single biggest success factor is having people who stick around on all those fronts, whether it's superintendents or principals or board members who stick around for a long time. Nothing happens in 2 years as a leader in education. Not nothing. But big things don't happen in 2 or 3 years. So it's that longevity that is. I'll just say, if we wouldn't be building, we wouldn't have got the school construction if we didn't have 3 board members and a superintendent who had multiple years before we tried to take it on. Just wouldn't have had the cred to do it, and the bandwidth to do it, and a bunch of other things. So yeah. Anything else on people's minds? I know it's super late.
Sleep.
Sleep is on your mind. With that note, I would motion to adjourn.
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Passes 5-0. We're adjourned at 9:15.
Oh, not bad.
Could be worse.